Hey guys, tonight we are going to wander into the great plaza of Tenochtitlan under a moon so pale it seems to be holding its breath. You can feel the cool stone under your bare feet as you shuffle past towering temples, their steps lined with shadows. In the air, a deep, rolling thump begins slow at first, then quicker, like a heartbeat that's had too much coffee. It's the night of the drums, and you probably won't survive this if you stand too close to the wrong priest with a sharp idea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and local time in the comments. I always like knowing who's listening where. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The plaza is alive with sound. The Aztec drums, huehuetls and tiponazals are not delicate things. They are hollowed tree trunks carved with snarling jaguar faces, their tops stretched tight with deerskin or human skin, depending on which rumor you believe. Priests stand before them, striking with heavy sticks tipped in resin. The beats roll across the crowd, vibrating in your ribs, pulling you forward like a tide. In this world, music is not entertainment. It is a bridge to the gods. You notice how each drum has its own voice, some low and thudding like distant thunder, others sharp and almost melodic. The drummer's arms are painted with spirals and glyphs. Every so often, they look skyward as though measuring if the sound has reached the heavens. The mainstream historical fact is that these drums were played in carefully structured rhythms to call deities to observe or participate in ceremonies, often lasting the entire night. No one here plays casually. Every beat is a cosmic invitation. The crowd sways in response, not because the priests tell them to, but because it feels impossible not to. You start to understand why the Aztecs believed the universe itself was kept alive by ritual sound. The drumming is relentless, hypnotic. You wonder if the people of the surrounding city can sleep through this, but then you remember they aren't supposed to. This is a city-wide act of devotion. Sleep would be almost rude. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some chronicles mention that during these all-night drumming rituals, dogs would howl in unison, creating a bizarre, layered soundscape. Imagine being in a city where the music comes from both drums and a chorus of confused, spiritually engaged dogs. It's either divine harmony or the earliest experimental noise concert. Closer to the temple steps, dancers in feathered headdresses and ankle rattles move in circular patterns, their shadows flickering in the torchlight. The air smells of copal incense, thick and sweet, curling into your hair. The drummers never stop, not for the dancers, not for the torches sputtering, not even when a priest trips on his own robes and pretends nothing happened. The sound becomes physical. Your ears hum, your teeth rattle, and your heart matches the beat whether you want it to or not. You realize this is part of the purpose, to pull you into a shared rhythm, to make your body a participant even if you didn't intend to join. Somewhere in the crowd, a man next to you mutters a prayer between each drum beat, his words almost swallowed by the noise. You can't hear the gods reply, but you suspect they're listening. A group of boys runs past carrying smaller hand drums, imitating the priests with exaggerated seriousness. They may be learning the patterns that, one day, will call down rain or keep the sun from dying in the sky. Historians still argue whether these public drumming nights were primarily about cosmic maintenance, keeping the gods happy, or also a form of psychological control, reinforcing the empire's presence in every mind and heartbeat. Maybe it's both. You step closer to one of the largest drums. The carver's marks are still visible beneath the paint, and the image on its side shows a jaguar devouring the sun, a scene that might be metaphor or prophecy. The priest playing it locks eyes with you for just a moment. It feels like he knows your whole life story, or maybe he's just wondering why you don't have face paint. Either way, you look away first. The music shifts, the pace slows, then quickens, then drops into a deep, pulsing rhythm. It feels like the plaza itself is breathing. People chant along now, words rising and falling like waves. You can't catch all of them, but you hear the name Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war repeated like a mantra. The stars above seem sharper somehow, as if even the sky is leaning in to listen. At the center of it all, the high priest lifts his arms and the drumming stops instantly, like someone cut the world's heartbeat. The silence is thick and almost painful. Then, with a single strike, the drums resume in unison, louder than before. The crowd roars approval. Somewhere deep in your mind, you feel a shift, a reminder that in this world, survival depends on staying in tune with forces you can't see. The night stretches on, the moon slides toward the horizon, and the drums keep calling. Maybe they're calling the gods, maybe they're calling you. Either way, you're not leaving yet. You find yourself walking away from the plaza just before dawn, but the sound of the drums still follows you, like an echo stuck in your bones. Your path leads to the edge of the city where warriors are gathering, their obsidian blades catching the first pale light. You soon realize this is no ordinary patrol. These men are preparing for something the Aztecs call exaggeration, the Flower Wars. Despite the poetic name, it's not about exchanging bouquets. It's about fighting to capture living sacrifices. And if you're imagining a lovely morning stroll with a daisy in your hair, well, you might want to leave the helmet on. The warriors' shields are painted with symbols of their lineage, their helmets shaped like snarling jaguars or fierce eagles. They are not headed to conquer territory today. Instead, their goal is to meet an enemy in a prearranged location and engage in a battle that, strangely, is more performance than conquest. The mainstream historical fact is that the Flower Wars were formalized ritual combats between the Aztec Triple Alliance and their neighbors, especially Tlaxcala. These battles served multiple purposes, honing martial skill, demonstrating power, and most importantly, capturing prisoners for future sacrifices to the gods. As you walk with them, the atmosphere feels oddly ceremonial. There are no scouts running ahead, no frantic shouts. Even the enemy knows this is coming. They will have gathered their own warriors to meet in equal measure. This is a duel of prestige and devotion as much as blood and survival. You notice how the warriors stretch their limbs and tighten their armor, but their faces carry no panic. They expect to live, but they also expect some of their number will not return. The captives they take will be brought back to the temples alive and given a brief time of honor before their end. It's a grim form of immortality in Aztec eyes. The quirky tidbit here? Some accounts suggest that younger, less experienced warriors were deliberately given less protective armor in these battles to encourage bravery or possibly recklessness. Imagine your commanding officer saying, "Congrats, you're in the big leagues now, so we're taking away your shield." Nothing builds confidence like knowing you're essentially bait. When the opposing force appears on the horizon, the warriors break into a jog. They raise their voices in ritual chants, calling on gods and ancestors. The air sharpens, filled with the smell of dust and the metallic tang of obsidian edges. There's no trumpet or drum to start the fight, only a moment of silent acknowledgement between leaders before the first warrior charges. You're caught in the crush as the two sides clash. The noise is overwhelming. Shouts, the clatter of wooden clubs, the hiss of arrows cutting the air. The goal here isn't to kill outright, at least not usually. A dead body can't walk up the temple steps, a living one can. So warriors aim for disabling blows, grabbing arms, wrestling opponents to the ground, binding them with ropes. Historians still argue whether the Flower Wars were truly mutual agreements to maintain a steady supply of sacrificial victims, or if they were also subtle attempts at political domination disguised as religious duty. Some suggest that these ritualized conflicts allowed enemies to weaken each other without the total destruction of cities, a kind of controlled burn in human form. In the chaos, you see a young man from the Aztec side tackle a Tlaxcalan warrior twice his size. They roll in the dust, the older man laughing between grunts, almost as if acknowledging the boy's audacity. Eventually, the older warrior is bound and hauled away, still smiling. It's unsettling to see someone accept capture so calmly, but here it is, a ticket to becoming part of the divine cycle. Your own position near the rear gives you a strange perspective. The battle is brutal, but it lacks the desperation of total war. It is ferocity with a script, violence with an agreed ending. When one side seems to be gaining too many captives, the fight tapers off. Warriors on both sides catch their breath, exchange a few words, maybe even compliments, and then turn away. The captives are gathered together, their hands tied, but they are not mocked or beaten. They are considered valuable offerings now. Some even hold their heads high, knowing they will be honored in the days ahead, though the form of that honor may make outsiders flinch. You trail behind the returning warriors as they march back toward the city. The sun is higher now, glinting off the helmets shaped like eagle heads. The crowd that greets them does not cheer in victory, but sings in solemn welcome. Children watch wide-eyed from the edges of the street, maybe imagining their own future battles, maybe calculating how fast they can run the other way when they're older. By the time you reach the central plaza again, the drumming from the night before has faded into memory, replaced by the rhythmic chanting of the warriors as they lead their living trophies toward the temple. You can feel the weight of what's coming for these men, and you realize that here in the Aztec Empire, even war can be a kind of theater, one with an audience that includes the gods themselves. The sun has climbed high now, turning the pale blue of morning into a blazing dome overhead. You follow the slow-moving procession of warriors and captives until it breaks off. The prisoners led toward a smaller temple for holding. The rest of the city seems to be in motion, but in an unusual way the streets are strangely quiet, stalls half-shuttered, conversations hushed. You soon learn why. Tonight is the Shumol, the new fire ceremony, a ritual so critical that even the bravest warriors tread lightly. This only happens once every 52 years, when the Aztec calendar completes its cycle. It's not just an anniversary, it's a cosmic reset button. The mainstream historical fact is that the Aztecs believed if the new fire ceremony failed, the sun would not rise again, and the world would end. That's not just pressure. That's the ultimate, no mistakes moment. In the hours before the ceremony, all fires in the city are extinguished. You watch smoke curl away from kitchens as women douse their hearths. The torches in the temples are snuffed out. Even the incense burners go cold. Tenochtitlan becomes an island of darkness in broad daylight, as though the city itself is holding its breath. You walk through the streets as the last tendrils of smoke vanish, and it's unsettling. The warmth of the fires is gone, replaced by a faint chill. No one is cooking. No one is heating water. Families sit quietly, eating whatever they prepared the day before. Every eye turns toward the east, waiting for night to fall. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some sources say that during this day, people would smash their household goods, throw out old clothes, and even destroy statues, believing they needed to start fresh if the world continued. Imagine a mass purge where everyone agrees to redecorate their life, all because the sun's job performance review is pending. As the sky darkens, the city empties into the causeways, the people streaming toward a hill outside the capital. Priests in elaborate feathered cloaks lead the way, their faces painted with glyphs representing stars and fire. The warriors you saw earlier are here too, guarding the crowd's path. No one lights a torch. The darkness thickens until it's nearly impossible to see more than a few paces ahead. The climb up the hill is silent except for the rustle of garments and the occasional cough. You can hear your own heartbeat and wonder if that's enough to keep the gods aware of your presence. At the top, a flat platform has been prepared. The high priest stands there, holding nothing, the emptiness of his hands more ominous than any weapon. Historians still argue whether the ceremony's origins lay in older Mesoamerican traditions or were entirely shaped by Aztec theology. What's certain is that the timing aligned with the conjunction of certain calendar cycles, reinforcing the belief that cosmic order was fragile. You hold your breath as the high priest watches the stars. The moment arrives when the Pleiades cluster passes directly overhead, a sign that the ceremony can proceed. A man is led forward, a sacrificial victim chosen for his purity. He lies back on a stone altar. No one speaks. The high priest produces a sacred fire drill, a wooden device to create friction. The instant the victim's chest is opened quickly, with practiced precision the fire drill is placed in the cavity, the wood spinning until a thin wisp of smoke curls upward. The first spark glows faintly, then flares. A collective sigh escapes the crowd, like the city exhaling after holding its breath all day. The flame is lifted high, its light dancing in the priest's eyes. From this single flame, torches are lit and carried down the hill. You watch as the darkness is pushed back, the fire spreading like a golden river through the streets. People light their home hearths from the torches, and the city blooms with warmth again. Children laugh, relieved that the sun will rise tomorrow. Somewhere behind you, the warriors hum a chant, their deep voices weaving with the crackle of fire. The smell of smoke returns, richer now, full of life and reassurance. You think about the emptiness of the city just hours ago, and how quickly it's transformed into a place of noise, heat, and color. The new fire ceremony has done more than preserve cosmic order. It's reminded everyone here that survival is a shared act, one that requires both faith and a little practical fire safety. By the time you return to the plaza, the drums have started again, not in the frantic rhythm of last night, but in a steady beat that feels like a heartbeat finally at rest. You realize that for the Aztecs, this wasn't just about avoiding destruction. It was about reminding themselves that the universe could keep going if they worked hard enough to make it so. Morning comes with a damp coolness in the air, the canals of Tenochtitlan shimmering under a sky that promises rain. You wander toward the smaller shrines dedicated to Tlaloc, the rainbringer, and it's here that you stumble upon a scene equal parts tender and unsettling. A line of families stands quietly outside a temple courtyard, children at their sides, each dressed in fine cotton tunics decorated with water glyphs. Some hold flowers, others small clay figurines of frogs. The mood is not festive, yet no one cries, at least, not yet. You learn from a local elder that this day's offerings to Tlaloc are special. The people believe that tears carry the power to summon rain, and the purer the soul, the more potent the plea. In their view, the tears of children are the strongest of all. It's not a simple matter of superstition. The Aztec worldview tied water, fertility, and life itself to a delicate relationship with their gods. They saw themselves as participants in a cosmic bargain, and the rains that fed their maize and amaranth fields were the other side of that agreement. The temple steps are slick from last night's drizzle. Priests wearing blue and white feathered headdresses usher the children forward. A few little ones cling to their mothers' skirts, reluctant to climb the wide stone stairs. The priests offer them flowers, singing songs about rivers and clouds. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a conch shell horn blow, low and mournful, as if the sky itself is being summoned to listen. Here's an unusual detail. According to some colonial-era accounts, attendants would gently pinch or scare the children before the rite, to ensure they cried, the belief being that Tlaloc's compassion was stirred most by visible sorrow. To an outsider, it's a jarring blend of care and cruelty, a moment where ritual purpose outweighs comfort. You notice the air grows heavy as the first child is led into the temple. Those who have already entered do not return to the courtyard. The crowd waits in a hush, the sound of water dripping from the temple roof oddly loud in the stillness. Some women begin their own quiet weeping, as though lending their tears to the effort. Debate among researchers continues about the deeper intent of this practice. Was it an act born entirely of devotion to a rain god? Or was it also a way to remind the empire's subjects of their dependence on priestly intercession? The line between faith and statecraft here is as fine as a drop of water on stone. You find yourself staring at a mural on one wall, a painted vision of Tlaloc with goggle-like eyes and jagged teeth, streams of water flowing from his hands. Around him are images of plants bursting from the earth, frogs leaping from pools, and storm clouds curling across the sky. It's beautiful, but there's something menacing in the god's wide-eyed expression, as if to say, I can give you life, but I can take it back just as easily. A soft rumble of thunder rolls across the lake. The crowd murmurs approval, a sign the god is listening. The priests emerge briefly to sprinkle the gathered people with water. The drops cool on your skin. They chant blessings in Nahuatl, words you can't fully follow but whose cadence feels like rainfall itself. One child, a boy no older than 7, turns as he's led inside, scanning the crowd until his eyes meet his mother's. She gives him a smile so gentle it almost breaks you. Then he disappears into the shadowed doorway, and the sound of drums begins slow, deliberate, echoing against the temple's inner walls. The ritual stretches on until the sun tilts westward. Eventually the priests reappear, their garments damp, their faces streaked with what might be sweat or rain or tears of their own. They pour water from clay vessels onto the ground, letting it soak into the earth. The crowd stirs, people touching the wet soil with their fingers, rubbing it on their foreheads as a blessing. By evening, dark clouds have gathered in earnest over the horizon. Whether by meteorological chance or divine reply, fat drops begin to fall onto the rooftops and canals. People lift their faces to the rain, letting it wash away the incense smoke and the day's heaviness. Somewhere in the swirl of water and shadow, you wonder if the god, Tlaloc, smiles, satisfied that the bargain has been kept. By the time the rain clouds drift away, the air feels cleaner, yet the mood in the city shifts to something sharper. You are drawn toward the main temple complex, where the sun's late afternoon glare bounces off whitewashed walls and gilded serpent carvings. A crowd is gathering again, but this time there's an electricity in the air, not anticipation for blessings, but for an act of raw devotion that makes even seasoned warriors stand a little straighter. On the temple's upper platform, priests in brilliant red and gold stand beside a low stone altar. This is no minor rite. It is the offering of the heart to Tonatiuh, the sun god. For the Aztecs, the sun does not rise by itself. It must be fed. They believe that the world's heartbeat is sustained only if they give it another heartbeat in return. If they fail, darkness will not just fall, it will stay. You can't help but notice the strange duality here. The plaza is dressed for a festival. Musicians with conch shells and flutes fill the air with bright, spiraling notes. Dancers with quetzal feathers swirl in precise steps, their shadows leaping like living paintings on the temple walls. And yet, at the center of all this color and motion, there's the cold geometry of the altar, a stone so worn from use that it almost gleams in the sun. A line of warriors ascends the temple steps, each leading a bound captive. These prisoners were taken in the Flower Wars, their fate decided long before today. The men do not fight. Their dignity is intact, as if they've accepted their role in keeping the universe turning. One even walks with his chin up, his eyes scanning the crowd as though memorizing it for later, wherever later might be. In accounts from the early Spanish chroniclers, the high priest was said to have hands and forearms stained permanently red from his role in these ceremonies. Whether that's literal truth or just a storyteller's flourish, it's a detail that makes you shift uncomfortably as you watch him step forward now. When the first captive is laid upon the altar, the crowd falls into a rhythm of chanting low, pulsing, matching the quick drum beat. The priest works swiftly, offering the still beating heart to the sky in both hands. From below you can't see the details clearly, but the movement is unmistakable, an offering lifted toward the sun before being placed into a golden vessel. The energy in the crowd spikes as though the collective fear that the sun might falter has been eased for another day. There's an odd, rarely discussed element to these rites. Some sources note that after the formal offering, the heart was sometimes touched to the lips of the idol of Tonatiuh, as if allowing the god to taste it directly. It's an image that feels both intimate and unsettling, bridging the gap between symbolic and literal nourishment. Debate among scholars often centers on whether the scale of these sacrifices was as immense as reported by the Spanish, or if those numbers were exaggerated to paint the Aztecs as more barbaric than they were. What's undeniable is that the act itself was real and central to Aztec religious life, not a footnote, but a pillar holding up their cosmos. You feel the heat radiating from the stone under your sandals as the ritual repeats. Each offering is followed by a new surge of music and chanting, the sound bouncing off the surrounding buildings. Above, the sun begins to dip lower, painting the temple in a deep orange glow. It's as if the god himself is acknowledging the gift, accepting the lifeblood of his followers in exchange for another dawn. When the last captive's heart has been raised, the priests move to close the ceremony. The golden vessel is carried inside the temple, hidden from view, while the crowd erupts into dance again. Children mimic the warriors, leaping and shouting. Merchants set out fresh food, the smell of roasted maize and cacao cutting through the heavy incense. As you step back into the thinning light, you notice that life resumes almost immediately. The act that just occurred, one that would shatter the sensibilities of an outsider, is woven here into the daily rhythm. The sun will rise tomorrow, and the people believe it is because they have ensured it will. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, the drums begin anew, echoing off the stone and water. You feel the vibration through your chest, a reminder that here, the beating of a human heart is not just life, it's currency for the gods. The next morning, the smell of damp earth mixes with the faint tang of wood smoke drifting over the city. You wake to the sound of shouting in the distance, not angry, but commanding, like the bark of a drill sergeant. Following the noise, you find yourself on the edge of a vast training ground, where young men are running drills beneath the watchful eyes of older warriors. The metallic glint of obsidian-tipped spears catches the light, and the air hums with the sound of discipline. This is where the eagle warriors are made. The name alone carries weight in Tenochtitlan. These are not ordinary soldiers. They are the Empire's elite fighters, whose courage, skill, and ferocity are matched only by their devotion to the gods. Their rank is earned, not inherited, and the process of joining their ranks is brutal enough to make even seasoned fighters pause. The men training here are stripped to the waist, their torsos painted with stylized feathers and sun motifs. They move in tight formations, advancing and retreating in unison. An older warrior barks corrections, smacking the occasional shoulder with a flat stick when someone's footwork slips. There's no room for hesitation. To hesitate in battle means your enemy lives, and you don't. In Aztec society, advancement through the warrior ranks was measured not by kills, but by the number of live captives you brought back. The Eagle Warrior Path demanded multiple successful captures in combat, as well as physical trials that tested stamina and endurance. If you couldn't endure exhaustion, pain, and hunger without faltering, you didn't belong. You watch as a group of recruits is herded toward a tall wooden scaffold with rope ladders. Without ceremony, they begin climbing, but halfway up, the instructors cut the ropes, sending them crashing into the muddy ground below. Those who don't get up instantly are yanked to their feet and told to climb again, this time carrying heavy shields. The message is clear: fall as many times as you must, but rise faster each time. There's a curious account from some Nahua oral traditions suggesting that Eagle Warrior hopefuls also underwent a strange ritual before their final trial, spending a night buried in sand up to the neck while the elders told them stories of past heroes. The idea was to teach them patience, humility, and the ability to endure discomfort without complaint. You can't help but think it sounds like an extreme spa treatment, minus the cucumber water. The path to the Eagle rank also demanded acts of symbolic transformation. Successful candidates received elaborate feathered costumes designed to make them appear part human, part bird of prey. The helmet, shaped like an eagle's head, was more than decoration. It was a public declaration that you now carried the sun's gaze in battle. Arguments among modern historians tend to focus on the balance between military efficiency and religious symbolism in this warrior order. Were the Eagles primarily an elite strike force? Or were they living, breathing offerings in waiting, their ultimate fate to die gloriously on the temple steps? Either way, their presence on the battlefield was as much psychological as it was physical, a moving reminder to friend and foe alike that the Empire's gods had claws. Back on the training ground, a recruit collapses mid-sprint, gasping for breath. The instructor doesn't scold, he simply tosses him a spear and points to the far wall. The young man hauls himself up, limping but refusing to quit. The other trainees glance his way, but there's no pity in their expressions. Here, survival is proof of worthiness, and compassion comes second to readiness. By midday, the drills shift to mock combat. Warriors pair off, circling with short clubs and padded shields. The blows are fast and precise, targeting joints and feet techniques meant to disable an opponent for capture. You notice that even in practice, no one is gentle. Bruises bloom on bare shoulders and ribs, but no one flinches. When the session ends, the recruits are given water and a moment to rest beneath a canvas awning. Some slump into the shade, eyes closed, but a few keep practicing footwork in the dust. The instructor nods at them approvingly, the kind of nod that says, "You might make it." As you walk away, the sound of wooden weapons striking shields follows you, a steady percussion that blends with the city's heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circles lazily in the sky, and you can't help but think it's watching for the next young man who will earn the right to wear its feathers. The training ground dust is still clinging to your sandals when you're drawn toward a smaller temple at the edge of the ceremonial district. The building is unlike the others, its walls draped in long strips of what you first think is cloth, fluttering faintly in the breeze. As you approach, you realize the texture is wrong. These are not woven threads, they are skins. You have arrived at the festival of Xiptotec, the flayed lord, a god of renewal, agriculture, and paradoxically, life through death. The air smells of incense mixed with something faintly metallic. Priests in elaborate masks move between the hanging strips, chanting in deep, measured voices. They wear full suits made from the tanned skins of sacrificial victims, the seams stitched crudely, the texture uneven. It's not a costume in the theatrical sense, it's meant to embody the god himself. In Aztec belief, the shedding of skin was symbolic of the earth renewing itself like corn husks peeling back to reveal new growth. The flayed skins represented that rebirth, even as they reminded onlookers of the sacrifice it required. Wearing them was considered an honor, though to you, the sight is unsettling enough to make your stomach turn. The ritual is deliberate and slow. Priests emerge from the temple, each moving with the heavy, deliberate steps of someone carrying more than just their own weight. The skins hang loosely, swaying slightly with every motion. Where the edges meet, you can see the faint stitching, the texture of something once alive. Accounts from early chroniclers describe these skins being worn for days, sometimes until they began to decay, at which point they were buried in temple grounds or given to warriors as relics. The act wasn't just symbolic, it was a lived, sensory connection to the god's power. One curious note, preserved in some indigenous oral traditions, claims that during the festival, the wearers of the skins would approach people in the marketplace, touching them with the cold, damp surface as a blessing. It was said to pass on fertility, luck, or health, depending on the need. You can imagine the mix of awe and discomfort this must have inspired. Among modern researchers, discussion continues on whether the ritual was primarily a fertility rite tied to the planting season or a broader act of cosmic renewal meant to ensure harmony between worlds. Both interpretations agree on one thing. The act demanded courage from both the wearer and the community. The courage to face death directly, without turning away. The ceremony you witness today unfolds with a peculiar rhythm. The priests, now fully dressed in the skins, begin a slow procession around the temple courtyard. They carry rattles made from gourds filled with seeds, shaking them in time with their steps. Each footfall leaves a faint print in the dust, as though marking the path for new growth to follow. Crowds line the edges of the courtyard, their expressions a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Children peek from behind their parents' legs, not quite sure whether to hide or stare. At one point, a priest pauses to lift his mask toward the sky, his face still hidden behind the human skin, the mouth edges stiff. The gesture feels almost like a conversation with the god he embodies. The smell intensifies as the day warms, but no one complains. Here, scent is part of the sacred experience, just as much as sight and sound. The rattles blend with the soft beat of hand drums, creating a trance-like pulse. By late afternoon, the procession returns to the temple. The priests step inside, disappearing into the dim interior where the skins will be removed and stored until the next cycle. Outside, the people linger, speaking quietly, as if reluctant to break the spell. As you turn away, a breeze passes through the courtyard, lifting the faint scent of incense over the rooftops. It's a reminder that here, even the most unsettling sights are woven into the larger fabric of life, a fabric that the Aztecs believed must occasionally be renewed, stitch by stitch, skin by skin. The sun tilts westward, washing the city in gold as you drift toward the banks of a wide canal. The water glints in long ripples, broken only by the rhythmic splash of paddles. A group of men rows past, their boat laden with carved wooden hoops, heavy rubber balls, and feathered costumes. You follow them to a walled court that feels half stadium, half temple. This is the sacred ball game, and today it is more than sport. The court is long and narrow, flanked by sloping stone walls. At the center of each wall, set high above the ground, is a carved stone ring just large enough for the heavy rubber ball to pass through. The spectators are already gathering, and you can sense that this match carries weight far beyond the scoreboard. In the Aztec world, this was a game bound tightly to the gods of creation and the underworld. The players weren't just athletes. They were participants in a cosmic reenactment. Teams file onto the court, each wearing elaborate gear. The leather belts at their waists and padded guards on hips and knees are there to absorb the shock of the ball, which can weigh as much as a small melon and be just as unforgiving. The players are not allowed to use their hands or feet, only their hips, knees, and elbows to move the ball. From an Aztec perspective, the game's outcome could be interpreted as divine commentary. Victories, defeats, even the number of points all were signs read by priests, layered with meaning about the empire's future. And on certain occasions, the match carried a grim prize. The losing side might be chosen for sacrifice, offered as a gift to the gods in gratitude for the game itself. One odd piece of lore survives from the chronicles of the era, the claim that sometimes a particularly honorable match would see the winners sacrificed instead, as the greatest tribute possible. Modern scholars debate whether this was a common practice or an exaggeration meant to shock outsiders, but the fact it exists at all says much about the Aztec value system. The game begins with a deep thud as the ball slams against a player's hip, bouncing toward the sloped wall. It rebounds sharply, ricocheting between opponents. The sound is visceral, a heavy whump of rubber on flesh, followed by the slap against stone. Players dive sideways to intercept, their bodies moving in a choreography that feels both graceful and brutal. Crowds cheer each close play, the noise rolling across the court like a wave. You notice priests standing in the shaded gallery above, watching intently, lips moving as they murmur interpretations to their assistants. For them, this is as much about reading the god's will as it is about who scores. Midway through the game, the ball soars upward, skimming the edge of the stone ring before dropping back into play. A player dives and twists, slamming his hip into it to send it flying toward the opposite ring. The ball whirls through the narrow opening with a satisfying thunk, and the crowd explodes in shouts and drumming. The pace intensifies. Sweat glistens on the players' skin, their chests heaving, the muscles in their legs and arms tight with effort. The game is relentless. There are no breaks unless the ball leaves the court. You start to appreciate the sheer endurance it demands, not just strength or skill. Discussions among historians often revolve around whether the primary purpose of these matches was to honor the gods, settle disputes between cities, or serve as public spectacle to reinforce the empire's unity. The answer may well be all three, braided together like the cords of the players' belts. When the final point is scored, the crowd surges to its feet. The winning team is hoisted up by their supporters, while the losing side is led toward the temple steps. There's no jeering, no humiliation, only a solemn acknowledgement that their part in the game is not truly over. They will play again, but next time the stakes may be higher than victory or defeat. As you leave the court, the echoes of the rubber ball against stone still seem to follow you down the narrow streets. Here in the Aztec Empire, even play is bound to the pulse of the divine, and losing can be the most sacred win of all. The night air carries a different kind of hum now, softer, almost conspiratorial. You follow it into a courtyard where clay jars are stacked shoulder-high against the walls, each sealed with a disc of wax. The sweet, slightly sour scent in the air tells you what they hold before anyone says a word: pulque, the sacred drink of the Aztec world. The courtyard is lit by torches, their light flickering over painted murals that depict a frothy, white liquid being poured into carved cups. A few older men in embroidered cloaks sit cross-legged near the center, speaking in low voices. This isn't just a drinking party, it's an audience with the gods, poured into a cup. Pulque, made from the fermented sap of the maguey plant, is considered a divine gift from Mayahuel, the goddess of agave. To drink it here, in ritual context, is to sip from the heart of the earth itself. The jars are opened with care, the wax peeled away to reveal a creamy, opaque liquid that clings to the sides of the vessel. Attendants ladle it into painted gourd bowls, which they present first to the priests. A few drops are poured onto the ground, an offering to the gods, before human lips touch it. It's a drink with rules. In daily life, only elders are permitted to drink pulque freely. For younger people, drunkenness is frowned upon or outright punished. But in the context of certain ceremonies, those rules bend. Tonight is one of those rare occasions when the drink is not only allowed but expected. You take a tentative sip. The flavor is peculiar, tangy, earthy, with a faint sweetness that lingers on your tongue. It's thicker than you expect, almost like drinking a cloud that decided to ferment. A man beside you chuckles, saying that the first sip always surprises you, but the second sip starts to feel like truth. Some chroniclers recorded that pulque feasts were as much political theatre as they were religious rites. Alliances could be sealed over shared cups, and a leader could test the character of guests by watching how they handled the drink. If you sipped slowly, you were wise. If you gulped and lost your composure, you revealed weakness. One curious bit of folklore claims that during certain festivals, people would intentionally drink to the point of mild intoxication, believing it opened a direct channel to the gods in dreams later that night. You can't help but think it's the sort of belief that's more popular after the third cup. As the bowls circulate, the courtyard fills with low laughter and bursts of song. Some guests begin chanting verses that shift between praise for the gods and gentle teasing of their neighbors. The priests, seated at the head of the gathering, keep a measured pace, drinking in slow, deliberate swallows, their expressions unreadable. Modern researchers still debate whether these gatherings were primarily devotional or if they doubled as opportunities for the elite to reinforce their status among the community. Here, though, the distinction doesn't seem to matter. The atmosphere is both reverent and convivial, as though the gods themselves wouldn't mind a little humor with their offerings. You notice that as the night deepens, the mood shifts again. Conversations slow. The singing becomes softer, almost like a lullaby. People sit closer together, their voices dropping as if sharing secrets not meant for the wider world. It's in this quiet that the spiritual side of the drink feels clearest, not in the intoxication itself, but in the way it binds everyone in the space, weaving a moment they'll all carry into tomorrow. When you finally step back into the cool night air, the sounds of the courtyard fade behind you, replaced by the steady lapping of water against the canal walls. The taste of pulque still lingers, warm and faintly sweet, like a reminder that not all Aztec rituals were about blood and fire. Some were about sharing breath, stories, and the gift of the maguey's heart. The next morning arrives with the scent of roasting maize drifting over the rooftops, but it doesn't mask the sharper aroma of cooking meat that rides on the breeze from the central plaza. Following the smell, you weave through the crowd until you see rows of reed mats laid out beneath awnings. On them sit dishes of stewed vegetables, bowls of thick maize gruel, and, at the center, platters piled high with neatly cut meat that glistens in the sunlight. Today's gathering is not a market feast. It's a tsoali banquet, a ceremonial meal offered to both gods and people, with an ingredient outsiders would find deeply unsettling. This meat, the people whisper, is not from any animal. It's from captives, sacrificed during a recent festival, and prepared in a way that transforms it from flesh to godly essence. In the Aztec worldview, Consuming a portion of the body is consuming the divine energy it carried. The act is not seen as grotesque here, but sacred, a literal communion with the gods. The mood in the plaza is solemn yet communal. Priests in elaborate feathered cloaks stand by, overseeing the distribution of the meal. No one reaches for food until a blessing is given, the priest sprinkling a few drops of cacao over each platter as an offering. Then, with a wave of his hand, the eating begins. The portions are small, symbolic, not indulgent. You watch as people take a single bite, chew slowly, and swallow with eyes closed. The belief is that this act unites the eater with the deity the victim represented. Often, the person sacrificed was chosen to impersonate a god for a year before their death, living richly, adored by the community, and then given back to the divine through the knife. Eating a piece of them now is like carrying the god's power within yourself. A rare but intriguing detail recorded in some sources tells of specific herbs and spices used to season the meat so that it resembled tila katlaoli, a maize and vegetable stew, masking its origin for outsiders or young children present at the feast. Whether this was to preserve decorum or to guard sacred secrets is still debated among scholars. Some anthropologists interpret these banquets as the ultimate act of reciprocity. The gods give life, the people return life, and in eating together, the bond is renewed. Others argue they reinforced political cohesion, reminding everyone ally and subject alike that the empire's power extended to every heartbeat. You see a young woman seated at the edge of the gathering. She holds her portion carefully, glancing at the priests before taking the smallest of bites. Her expression changes not to horror, but to something that looks almost like relief. Around her, similar expressions flicker: pride, reverence, the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling a duty that stretches back generations. The meat is gone quickly, and the remains, bones cleaned of flesh, are gathered and placed in baskets to be taken to the temple for burial. No scraps are left to chance. The crowd begins to disperse, murmuring softly, not in the rowdy chatter of a public meal, but in the subdued tones of those who've shared something precious and irreversible. As you turn to leave, a priest catches your gaze. His voice is calm, almost conversational, as he tells you that what you have witnessed is not an ending, but a renewal. The god's essence now walks in the bodies of the faithful. The thought settles in your mind like an ember, glowing faintly, both unsettling and oddly beautiful. You step into the narrow street beyond the plaza, the air cooler here in the shade. The mingled smells of incense, maize, and meat still cling to you. Whatever tomorrow's rituals will be, you understand now that the Aztec idea of communion is not a metaphor. It's as tangible as the food on their plates and as enduring as the gods they serve. By midday, the plaza has shifted into a lighter rhythm, the solemn heaviness of the morning replaced by bright colors and graceful motion. You follow the sound of rattles and flutes to a wide open space near the temple gardens, where women and men in brilliant butterfly-shaped backpieces are arranging themselves in concentric circles. This is the papalotl ikan, the butterfly dance, a celebration not of conquest or sacrifice, but of the souls of warriors and children who've left the world. The dancers' costumes shimmer in the sunlight, each wing frame covered in layers of dyed cotton and feathers, so that when they move, the patterns flicker like real wings in flight. The air smells faintly of crushed marigolds, petals scattered across the packed earth, their gold and orange matching the dancers' headdresses. A light breeze stirs the petals, and you can't tell whether it's the wind or the dancers' own energy that sets them in motion. This dance is more than beauty. It's a bridge between worlds. In Aztec thought, fallen warriors and children who died young journeyed to the House of the Sun or the House of Tlaloc, returning to the mortal world in the form of butterflies or hummingbirds. Today's performance is a way to welcome them back, if only for a moment. The music begins slowly high, sweet notes from flutes balanced by the deeper hum of shell trumpets. The dancers start in small steps, lifting their feet just enough to send the ankle rattles whispering. With each measure, their movements grow broader, arms rising to mimic wings catching air. From above, the shifting patterns would look like ripples across a pond. One little-known element of this ritual, noted in a handful of colonial-era codices, describes dancers carrying small bowls of nectar, lifting them skyward at certain points to feed the returning souls. Whether this was literal nectar or a symbolic gesture remains unclear, but the image is striking mortals offering sustenance to the spirits in the form they once knew. Some researchers interpret the butterfly dance as a seasonal rite tied to agricultural cycles, with the return of certain butterfly species marking the time for planting or harvest. Others see it primarily as a memorial, a form of collective mourning expressed through beauty and movement rather than sorrow. Standing here, you suspect it's both. As the tempo of the music rises, the circles of dancers rotate in opposite directions, wings brushing against each other in passing. Children on the edges mimic the movements, their smaller paper wings flapping wildly as they try to keep up. The crowd claps in time, not to encourage the dancers, they don't need it, but to join in the shared heartbeat of the moment. A woman in the innermost circle spins sharply, her wings catching the sunlight in a blaze of red and gold. For an instant, it feels like she truly is about to lift off, her shadow stretching like an elongated butterfly across the ground. The musicians lean into the crescendo, the sound filling the space until it seems there's no separation between music, dance, and air itself. Then, as if on a single unspoken cue, the dancers slow, steps becoming smaller, wings folding inward. The flutes soften, the shell trumpets fade, the petals settle on the ground again. The entire performance closes in near silence, save for the faint rattle of the last ankle bells. The audience doesn't erupt into applause. Instead, they bow their heads briefly. In this culture, gratitude is often expressed in quiet acknowledgement, not noise. The dancers return to the edge of the square, removing their wings with careful hands, laying them flat on woven mats. They will be stored away until the next time the spirits are called home. As you leave, the faint scent of marigolds clings to your clothes, and the image of those rippling wings stays with you. In a city where ritual often means blade and blood, you've just witnessed one that breathes on air and sunlight alone, proof that in the Aztec world, the gods are not only fed, but also welcomed, like family returning for a visit. By late afternoon, you wander past the temple gardens into a narrow lane, lined with stone walls, where the air grows heavy with the scent of resin and iron. Following the smell, you step into a rectangular courtyard, where several priests kneel before a row of ceramic bowls filled with thick, crimson liquid. The walls here are streaked with faded stains, and above them hang bundles of dried herbs and strips of painted bark. This is not a market, nor a slaughter yard. It's a purification ground, a place where sacred spaces are washed, not with water, but with human blood. In the Aztec mind, blood was the most potent cleansing agent in existence, because it carried tonali, the animating heat and spirit force of a person. A temple, after enough use, was thought to absorb impurity from ritual smoke, from contact with human hands, even from the presence of the unworthy. It had to be renewed. The priests begin by chanting softly, their voices weaving a low, repetitive hum that seems to hang in the air. Attendants hand them bundles of Maggie thorns, each one polished to a wicked point. Without hesitation, the priests press the thorns into their own ears, tongues, and calves, drawing thin streams of blood that drip into the bowls. The liquid is then scooped out with brushes made of long, soft feathers. Moving to the temple walls, they paint the stone with broad, deliberate strokes. Some start from the top, letting the blood run down in dark lines. Others focus on corners and doorframes, careful to fill every crevice. The smell is metallic and earthy, mixing with the tang of copal incense burning in clay braziers nearby. A curious detail preserved in certain pictorial codices shows that sometimes this cleaning was combined with the scattering of flower petals, creating a strange contrast, streaks of deep red across stone, softened by the yellow and white of fresh blooms. It's hard not to see the poetry in it, life force mingling with beauty to reset the spiritual balance. Modern interpretations of this rite vary. Some scholars frame it as a literal act of disinfection in a time before soap and chemical cleansers, where the antiseptic properties of plant resins and certain herbs were combined with the symbolic weight of blood. Others emphasize its purely metaphysical role, not about germs, but about maintaining harmony between the physical and divine. From your vantage point, it feels like both. The priests work with slow precision, murmuring words you can't quite follow. Occasionally, they pause to press a blood-smeared palm flat against the wall, leaving behind a print like a seal of ownership. One younger priest seems almost dizzy from the bloodletting, yet he smiles faintly as he dips his brush again. To falter here would be a kind of insult to the gods, as though you were unwilling to give even a drop of yourself to keep their house pure. The work continues until the bowls are empty, the walls now streaked and glistening in the angled sunlight. Then, as the final act, the priests wash their hands in water mixed with crushed marigolds, letting the golden petals stick to their skin before wiping them away. The courtyard is quiet except for the crackle of incense. As the crowd that has gathered disperses, you run your hand lightly over the newly painted stone. The surface is warm, both from the day's heat and from the lingering energy of the ritual. In this place, cleaning is not a mundane chore, it's an offering, one drop at a time. You leave the courtyard of the blood-painted walls and follow a narrow path toward the western edge of the ceremonial district. The smell hits you before the sight, a dry, sun-bleached scent of bone and dust. Ahead rises a structure that looks like a fence but isn't made of wood at all. It's a tsompantli, a skull rack, and it dominates the open square like a grim announcement to anyone who approaches the city. Rows upon rows of human skulls are mounted on horizontal poles, each one pierced clean through by a wooden shaft. The bleached surfaces catch the sunlight, creating a glare that makes you squint. From a distance, the arrangement almost seems decorative, but as you draw closer, the reality settles heavy in your stomach. These are not trophies hidden away in a temple, they are displayed in the open, a message to both gods and mortals. In Aztec cosmology, the skull is more than the remnant of a body. It's a vessel that once carried life, and in death, it becomes an object of power. Displaying it is both an offering and a proclamation. Here is proof of devotion, proof of victory, proof that the gods have been fed. The rack is massive, stretching the length of the square, supported by upright posts carved with serpents and sunbursts. Some skulls are fresh enough to still hold bits of dried sinew. Others have weathered into hollow, almost polished shells. You notice that many still have their teeth, grinning in eternal parody of joy. One striking detail preserved in archaeological finds is the presence of skull masks, real human crania reshaped and painted, sometimes with turquoise mosaics, sometimes with obsidian eyes set into the sockets. These were not left to rot on the rack, but kept inside temples, used in dances and processions. What you see here, exposed to the elements, is only part of the story. The crowd moves past the rack with an ease that surprises you. Children tug at their mothers' cloaks, pointing out skulls with unusual markings. A young man leans in to examine a jawbone that bears a carved glyph, perhaps the name of the captive it once belonged to. Here, death is not hidden away. It's part of the city's architecture, as unremarkable as a market stall to those who live among it. Some historians argue about the primary function of the tsompantli. Was it meant mainly as an offering to the gods, a kind of ongoing prayer in bone? Or was it a political instrument, meant to instill awe and fear in enemies and allies alike? The truth, standing here, seems to be a seamless blend of both. As the sun lowers, shadows from the poles stripe the ground like the bars of a cage. The skulls seem to glow faintly in the warm light, their empty sockets looking out across the square. A group of priests approaches with baskets of flowers, tucking marigolds into the gaps between skulls. The golden petals soften the display, making it almost festive, but not enough to erase the fact that each bloom rests in a place where eyes once were. A faint breeze stirs the air, carrying with it the dry rattle of bone against wood. The sound is delicate, almost like wind chimes, except these chimes sing of battles fought, prisoners taken, and lives given over to the gods. When you finally turn away, the image of the rack stays with you. It's not simply gruesome, it's deliberate, woven into the city's living rhythm. In Tenochtitlan, even the remains of the dead have work to do standing in rows, forever speaking without voices, telling the gods and the living alike that the covenant between them has been honored. The sun has dipped low enough to cast the city in a bronze haze when you hear the long, resonant call of a conch shell. The sound rolls through the streets like a deep breath, drawing you toward the base of a tall, stepped temple whose upper platform glows with torchlight. This is not the clamor of war or the bustle of festival. It's the beginning of the priest's midnight vigil. You climb the temple steps alongside others who have come to witness, or perhaps to lend their silent presence as the guardians of the sacred pass an entire night in wakefulness. The air grows cooler as you ascend, and by the time you reach the platform, the city below feels far away, as though you've stepped into another layer of the world. The platform is divided into shadow and flame. Along one side, great braziers spill plumes of copal incense into the night air, their smoke curling skyward like translucent ribbons. Along the other side, the darkness is left untouched, as if to keep space for the gods themselves to sit unseen. The priests are already seated in a wide circle. Their faces are painted in black and white, contrasting patterns meant to represent the dualities they serve: day and night, life and death, fire and water. Each holds a rattle made of gourd or bone, and in front of them rests a drum whose skin has been stretched to a perfect, taut pitch. They begin softly, a low hum that rises and falls in waves, punctuated by the slow heartbeat of the drum. This rhythm will carry them through the night. The purpose of the vigil is both practical and cosmic: to guard the temple's sacred objects, to honor the gods without pause, and to maintain a spiritual watchfire so that no gap forms in the chain of devotion that keeps the universe in balance. One detail preserved in the writings of early observers describes how the priests occasionally whispered prayers into ceramic jars during these vigils, sealing them afterward. The jars were later buried in temple foundations or broken at the start of new rituals, as if to release stored blessings into the world. It's a quiet, almost secretive practice, but one that speaks to the depth of their belief in the power of words. As the night deepens, the temperature drops. The priests do not move to fetch blankets or adjust their posture. They endure the chill as part of their offering, their focus never breaking. Occasionally, one rises to stoke the braziers, sending a fresh wave of smoke into the air. The scent is sharp, almost medicinal, and it clings to your hair and clothes. Among modern scholars, there's ongoing discussion about whether these vigils were primarily about guarding sacred relics against theft or desecration, or whether they were purely devotional, a deliberate act of physical and mental endurance to demonstrate piety. From here, watching the unwavering stillness of the circle, the distinction feels unnecessary. The act itself is the point. Hours pass without a change in pace. The hum and drum continue, weaving a steady thread through the shifting constellations overhead. Occasionally, a priest tilts his head back to look at the stars, perhaps reading omens in their patterns. You find yourself matching your breathing to the slow rhythm, feeling your heartbeat ease into its measure. Somewhere below, the city sleeps. Here, on this platform between earth and sky, the gods are kept company through the long hours, their watchers neither asleep nor distracted. When dawn finally comes, it will not be greeted with exhaustion, but with the satisfaction of a duty kept unbroken. And as you descend the steps, the first light of morning brushing the edges of the city, you realize that the vigil is not just about keeping the gods awake to the world, it's about keeping the people awake to the gods. The dawn mist curls low over the canals, turning the water into shifting bands of silver and shadow. Somewhere nearby, you hear the muted clink of obsidian tools, followed by the soft murmur of voices. You follow the sound through a narrow alley into a small courtyard, where men and women sit cross-legged, each with a shallow ceramic bowl in front of them. This is an act of devotion that requires no captive, no grand procession, only the giver and their own body. Here, the people practice self-bloodletting, offering a portion of themselves directly to the gods. In Aztec thought, the life force inside you is the most personal thing you can give. A drop is a gift. A stream is a sacrifice. The process begins simply. Each person selects their instrument, a maguey thorn, a stingray spine, or a sliver of obsidian sharpened to a needle's point. These are not handled casually. Some are wrapped in decorated cloth, others stored in carved wooden boxes, as if each tool is itself a sacred object. The participants speak little. A man dips his thorn in water, then draws it carefully across his earlobe. A woman pricks the skin between her knuckles. Another leans forward, pressing the point into his tongue. The first red droplets fall into the bowls, mingling with water or crushed flower petals to make the offering more fragrant. In early codices, scenes of self-bloodletting often show people threading thin cords through small piercings in their skin, letting the cords soak in their blood as a continuous stream of prayer. Some even passed reeds or knotted grass through the pierced area as a physical token of the act. It is not done in haste. It's a deliberate conversation between body and divinity. There's an unusual account from an old Nahuatl hymn describing this as feeding the sun in the quiet hours, suggesting that the gods, like people, could hunger between major festivals. Whether meant literally or poetically, it captures the intimacy of these moments. There's no crowd, no spectacle, just you and the unseen. Contemporary researchers often discuss whether such practices were primarily religious or whether they also served as social markers, proving loyalty and resilience. Watching the people here, it seems to be both. There's pride in their posture, but also a softness in the way they close their eyes, as if picturing their offering drifting upward on the morning air. When a bowl is full enough, its contents are poured onto the roots of a flowering plant or at the base of a small household altar. The red seeps into the soil, darkening it briefly before disappearing. A priest moves among them, murmuring blessings, his fingertips lightly touching each person's forehead. One older man catches your eye. His hands are steady, but the lines on his face suggest decades of repeating this act. He gives a faint smile before leaning down to make one last offering, a single drop onto the stone at his feet. Then he wipes his hands on a strip of cotton, folds it, and tucks it away. The courtyard smells faintly of earth, flowers, and the sharp tang of iron. As the participants rise and file out into the street, they carry themselves lightly, as though each prick of the thorn has also lifted some unseen weight. You leave with them, sunlight now breaking fully over the rooftops, and you realize that here, sacrifice isn't always about spectacle sometimes. It's about the quiet discipline of giving a piece of yourself when no one is watching. The marketplace is a bright, chaotic tide of voices when you arrive, but one figure moves through it like a living banner. He is draped in fine cotton, his skin painted in intricate patterns, a towering headdress of quetzal feathers shimmering with every step. People make way for him without being asked, some bowing slightly, others offering small gifts of fruit or flowers. You quickly understand why this is not merely a nobleman. This is a Ixiptla, a chosen human who lives as the physical embodiment of a god. In the Aztec world, an impersonator of a deity is not playing a role in the theatrical sense. He is that god for the span of a sacred year, moving through the city as a walking manifestation of divine will. His days are filled with ceremony, his meals prescribed, his conduct under constant watch. He sleeps in the temple, not in his own home, and every action from speaking to strangers to the way he steps into sunlight is part of the performance. The crowd's respect is tinged with something heavier, the knowledge that at the end of his year, his body will be offered back to the god he has represented. This is not a punishment. It's the fulfillment of the role, the final act in a script agreed upon the moment he accepted the honor. You notice the way the impersonator glances at each person he passes, his eyes calm, his smile faint. There's a serenity in him, but also the unshakable awareness that every greeting, every gesture, is being remembered not as the act of a man, but as the movement of the divine. One fascinating note preserved in the Florentine Codex describes how these impersonators were sometimes married to women chosen from noble families during their final months, allowing them to live out symbolic unions on behalf of the gods. Their last weeks would be filled with feasts, music, and ritual dances, as if the city itself were preparing them for their departure. The scholars who study this practice often differ on its exact origins. Was it a continuation of older Mesoamerican traditions where rulers themselves were seen as semi-divine, or was it uniquely Aztec in its formalized cycle of embodiment and sacrifice? Whatever its roots, the practice made the gods' presence tangible. You could meet them in the street, speak to them, see them eat and breathe. The impersonator you follow today is said to embody Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and the obsidian mirror. At one point, he stops near a stall selling polished black stones, lifting one to catch his reflection. The vendor bows deeply, and the impersonator places the mirror back without a word. The moment is small, but the crowd leans in to watch, as though it contains some hidden omen. By evening, he is escorted to a raised platform at the edge of the plaza. Musicians begin to play, and dancers circle him in spirals, their bodies painted in black and gold. The impersonator stands still at the center, hands folded, watching the dancers with a gaze that seems to pass right through them. The air is thick with copal smoke when he finally raises his arms. The crowd falls silent, and in a clear, steady voice, he offers a blessing in the name of his god. His words are formal, measured, and when he steps down from the platform, the people part for him again. You know he will live like this for the remainder of the year, honored, adorned, yet always walking toward the moment when the feathers and paint will be removed, and his final duty will begin on the temple steps. For now, though, he moves through the market like sunlight over water, each step a reminder that in this city, divinity does not always live in the sky. Sometimes, it walks among you. Morning light spills over the market district, revealing stalls already heavy with goods, baskets of cacao beans, rolls of dyed cotton, piles of jade beads glinting in the sun. But as you wander deeper, you notice certain tables draw a different kind of attention. These merchants are not selling food or fabric. Their goods are small bundles wrapped in leaves, carved figurines of bone and wood, and clay jars sealed with red wax. This is the Tianguis of Omens, a place where fate itself is for sale. A woman in a crimson shawl sits behind one of the busiest stalls. Her table is crowded with charms, tiny amulets shaped like maize kernels for prosperity, obsidian arrowheads to ward off enemies, and small packets of herbs bound with colored string. Customers lean in close as she murmurs descriptions of each item's power. One man buys a charm to ensure safe travel. Another exchanges cacao for a small clay disc said to protect against betrayal. In Aztec culture, marketplaces like this were more than places to buy material goods. They were centers of spiritual exchange. It was believed that fate could be influenced by carrying the right object or offering the right gift to the right god. The merchants here functioned as both traders and low-level ritual specialists, passing on not just objects but instructions for their use. An unusual detail recorded in early Spanish accounts mentions that some merchants kept live animals, owls, snakes, even small lizards not as food, but as moving talismans. Buying one meant taking on the animal's symbolic properties: stealth, transformation, or resilience. The idea of releasing them into certain temple courtyards was said to carry your wish to the gods. Modern interpretations of these markets vary. Some anthropologists view them as an extension of state religion into everyday life, ensuring that even casual purchases reinforce devotion to the gods. Others see them as semi-independent spaces where local traditions and personal superstitions thrived beyond official doctrine. You linger near a stall selling obsidian mirrors, small polished discs wrapped in woven cloth. The merchant unwraps one and holds it toward you, letting you see your face reflected in its dark surface. She tells you it can be used to look at what is hidden, the thoughts of a rival, the truth behind a promise, or the path your own life might take. Her eyes search yours as she speaks, and you wonder whether she's selling a tool a prophecy, or both. Nearby, a young boy begs his mother for a carved wooden hummingbird, its wings painted gold. The merchant explains that the hummingbird carries messages between worlds, a good charm for someone hoping to hear from a loved one far away. The mother hesitates, then hands over 3 cacao beans. The boy clutches the figurine like a living thing. The air here is thicker than in other parts of the market, filled with the resinous scent of burning herbs. A man with a basket of white flowers stops to sprinkle petals over a pile of figurines, murmuring words you can't quite catch. Around you, commerce and prayer are woven so tightly that they're indistinguishable. As you leave the market, the sound of barter fades, but you feel the weight of the place lingering not from anything you bought, but from the sense that here, the future is a thing you can touch, wrap in cloth, and carry home in your pocket. The heat of midday shimmers over the lake's surface as you follow a narrow canal toward the outer edge of the city. The hum of the marketplace fades, replaced by the rhythmic splash of oars and the low calls of boatmen steering long, flat canoes. Soon, you reach a quiet inlet where priests in blue and white robes are gathering, their garments heavy with embroidered waves and stylized raindrops. This is the domain of the water gods, and today the ritual will take place on the water itself. You board one of the canoes with a small group of onlookers. The vessel rocks gently, the smell of wet reeds rising around you. Ahead, a larger raft is anchored in the shallows, its deck covered with woven mats, clay vessels, and bundles of flowers. At the center is a low wooden frame, bound with rope, the place where the chosen sacrifice will be bound before being given to Tlaloc, the rainbringer, and Calchiutlicue, goddess of rivers and lakes. In the Aztec worldview, water is both gift and danger. It nourishes the maize fields and fills the canals, but floods and storms can destroy with the same force they give. Offering a life to the gods of water is an act meant to maintain balance, to keep their generosity flowing but their wrath at bay. The victim today is a young man, his wrists loosely tied with woven reed rope. His face is painted in bright blue spirals, the mark of Tlaloc. He doesn't resist as 2 priests guide him to sit in the center of the raft. Instead, he gazes out over the lake, the sun catching in his dark hair. A curious note preserved in some colonial records claims that before such rituals, the chosen victim was given gifts, fine food, clothing, and in some cases, an obsidian blade, so that he could defend himself symbolically against the god's call. Whether this was an act of respect or simply part of the ceremonial script is uncertain, but it shows that even in sacrifice, there was a measure of dignity. Drums begin to thrum from a nearby canoe, their sound carrying over the still water. Priests lift clay jars of pulque and pour the liquid into the lake, the ripples catching sunlight as it spreads. The smell of copal incense rises from small braziers, mixing with the scent of water lilies floating nearby. The priests chant in long, winding phrases, each verse ending with a sharp exhalation. On the final call, they tilt the wooden frame and let the young man slip gently into the water. His body disappears beneath the surface without struggle, as though the lake itself has drawn him down. There is no applause, no cheer, only silence broken by the slow beat of the drums. For a moment, the lake lies perfectly still. Then a breeze stirs, sending small waves against the raft and carrying the scent of wet earth to your nose. Among scholars today, there's debate about how often such rituals occurred. Some argue they were rare and reserved for times of extreme drought or flooding. Others believe they were seasonal, tied to agricultural cycles. Standing here, the scale feels intimate, almost private, the kind of ceremony meant more for the gods than for human witnesses. The priests scatter marigold petals across the water before rowing away, leaving the raft behind. The petals drift in bright clusters, the yellow stark against the blue-green ripples. You watch them spread slowly outward, as though carrying the offering to every corner of the lake. When you finally turn back toward the city, the drums have faded, but the scent of water and incense clings to your clothes. You can't shake the feeling that somewhere beneath the surface, the gods have taken their gift and that, in their own unfathomable way, they are satisfied. The afternoon light has grown pale and thin by the time you hear it, a sound that is neither music nor speech but something in between. It's a long, low wail that swells and breaks, then swells again, like the tide of human sorrow. You follow it through winding streets until you emerge into a smaller square, where a slow procession moves beneath a canopy of woven reeds. At its head are women clad in dark cotton dresses, their hair unbound and hanging loose around their shoulders. Their faces are painted with streaks of ash, giving them a ghostly pallor. They carry bundles of white flowers, and with each step they sway gently, as if the weight of grief pulls them from side to side. The sound you heard, that mournful wailing, rises from their throats, a mixture of chant and sob. This is a ritual for the Chihuahuatl, the weeping woman, a figure who walks between the mortal and spirit worlds. She is part goddess, part omen, a protector of women in childbirth and a harbinger of misfortune. In the Aztec imagination, her cries could summon the dead or warn of catastrophe. Today, the mourners imitate her lament to draw the attention of wandering spirits, guiding them toward the offerings waiting at the temple. The crowd does not cheer, nor do they stand entirely still. Some join in the wailing, others bow their heads, perhaps remembering their own losses. Children clutch their mothers' hands, their eyes wide, as if unsure whether the women at the front are entirely human. One curious note from oral tradition suggests that during these processions, the mourners' tears, if genuine, were collected in small gourds and poured at crossroads afterward. The belief was that spirits, confused or restless, could follow the trail of grief into the care of the gods. Whether anyone here truly gathers tears today is hard to tell, but the women's cheeks glisten in the dimming light. Specialists in Aztec ritual sometimes debate whether this ceremony originated purely as a religious rite or whether it also served as a form of social mourning, a sanctioned time to express grief that might otherwise be hidden in public life. Watching it unfold, it feels like both, a performance with divine purpose and a release for very human sorrow. The procession turns slowly around the square, its pace unbroken. The women's voices seem to blend with the rustle of reed canopies overhead, creating a sound that feels older than the city itself. Each time their wail peaks, it sends a shiver through you, as though the air itself has thickened. Eventually, they arrive at a small altar piled with flowers, maize cakes, and bowls of water. One by one, they lay their bundles down. A priest in white robes sprinkles the offerings with ground copal, the scent rising like a soft curtain over the square. The women bow, still singing, their voices now softer, like the ebbing of a tide. The onlookers remain silent until the mourners begin to disperse, disappearing into side streets as quietly as they arrived. The square feels strangely hollow in their absence, as though some unseen presence has followed them away. As you leave, you catch sight of a single white flower lying in the gutter, its petals damp from the evening mist. You think about the way their voices seem to fold the world in on itself, turning grief into something both haunting and holy. In a city full of noise, this is the kind that stays with you long after it fades. The next morning greets you with a restless energy in the streets. People are streaming toward the central causeway, their voices buzzing with anticipation. You follow the flow until the sound of rattles and the hiss of something alive reaches your ears. Then you see them, a line of men and women carrying long wooden staffs, each staff crowned with the coiled body of a living serpent. It's the Cotl-Huey-Teculuhutl, the snake dance of renewal, a ritual meant to honor the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In Aztec belief, the snake is not merely a creature of the earth, it is a bridge between worlds, able to shed its skin and emerge renewed, a living metaphor for cosmic regeneration. The dancers are painted from head to toe in ochre and deep green, their bare feet dusted with ground maize. The snakes, alive and shifting, wrap themselves around the dancers' wrists and necks, tongues flicking as if tasting the incense-thick air. These are not small garden serpents. Some are as long as a man is tall, their scales catching the morning sun in flashes of gold, black, and bronze. The procession moves slowly down the causeway, flanked by drummers and flute players. Each dancer steps in time with the beat, the movement designed to keep the snakes calm and perhaps to mirror the serpent's own fluid motion. Every so often, a dancer lifts their staff high, letting the snake's body uncoil in the air before winding it back down again. The crowd reacts with murmurs of awe and occasional nervous laughter. An uncommon detail preserved in temple murals shows that during certain ceremonies, the snakes would be fed drops of sacrificial blood before the dance began, symbolically granting them divine vitality. Whether that has been done today is not announced, but the way the dancers treat the snakes with both reverence and care suggests these animals are more than props. Among scholars, interpretations of the snake dance vary. Some see it as an agricultural rite, tied to the arrival of rains and the fertility of the soil. Others argue it carried a deeper, esoteric meaning linked to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, whose domain stretched across creation itself. Here, watching the slow, deliberate undulation of dancers and serpents alike, it feels as if both meanings flow together. The dance reaches the steps of the main temple, where the performers form a wide circle. The drumming changes slower now, with deep, resonant strikes. One by one, the dancers step into the center, raising their serpents toward the sun, their voices lifting in a chant that echoes across the plaza. From the temple's shadowed entrance, a high priest emerges, his cloak patterned in emerald and gold feathers. He walks the circle, touching each snake lightly on the head with a bundle of herbs dipped in water. The droplets glisten on the scales, a blessing meant to carry the power of the ritual beyond the city's walls. The moment the last serpent is blessed, the drumming quickens again. The dancers break the circle and wind their way back into the streets, disappearing into the crowd like rivers splitting into streams. The snakes are calm now, their bodies slack but still alert, as if they have tasted something invisible. As the crowd disperses, you find a single green scale lying on the ground, still warm from the sun. You turn it over in your hand, thinking about how easily the creature will shed it, leaving behind what it no longer needs. Here, renewal isn't just a prayer, it's a rhythm, a skin, a dance. By late morning, the city feels rinsed and reset, as if last night's songs have been folded and tucked away. You drift toward a plaza where sunlight pours between temple walls in bright shafts, and that's where you meet the fragrance before you see its source. It's warm, resinous, a little citrus and pine, the kind of smell that makes your shoulders drop without your permission. Then the first plume rolls over you, a slow, milky billow that turns the air into a soft curtain, and you step straight into the heart of an incense cloud. Attendants move like constellations around a central brazier, each carrying clay censers with wide mouths and flared rims. The bowls glow orange at the edges, and every tilt births a new ghost of smoke. Copal, the tree resin that the Aztecs treat like bottled sunlight, crackles as it melts, sending up columns that twist and braid. You've walked through drums, dances, and snakes. Now you walk through clouds. If the snake dance was the skin of renewal, this is its breath. A priest in a mantle stitched with shell discs sweeps past you, making lazy figure eights with a handheld thurible. The motion looks casual, almost playful, but it's anything but random. The smoke is steered toward people, doorways, offerings, and even the corners of the plaza where shadows pool. In this cosmology, fragrance is a carrier, a messenger. You don't shout at the heavens, you perfume them and let the air deliver your words. Written accounts from the valley describe copal as a standard component of ceremonies great and small. It accompanies sacrifices, crownings, market blessings, military send-offs, and the quiet moments at household altars. The logic is simple and grand at once. If blood feeds, smoke speaks. You can feel that logic as your throat picks up a sweetness you'll be tasting for the rest of the day. Consider it the earliest version of a long-lasting voice note. You notice how different sensors tell different stories. Some are plain bowls blackened with use. Others wear faces goggle-eyed Tlalocs with grins wide enough to swallow a storm, or sun discs whose rays curl like tongues of heat. A few are taller, almost to your knee, with perforations that scatter small stars of smoke across the ground. The plaza reads like a map of fragrances, lanes of scent drifting and meeting. A small line forms at the center. Parents with babies, warriors with shields, merchants clutching bundles of dyed cotton. Each approaches the brazier, and an attendant wafts smoke over the item or the person, tracing a quick spiral as if sealing a stamp. The babies blink. The warriors stand absolutely still. The merchants look relieved as though this scented breath will settle debts before they're even incurred. You've seen tears offered to call rain and blood used to clean stone. Now you watch smoke used to carry hope. One of the more delightful snippets preserved in early descriptions says market sellers sometimes sweetened their copal with crushed flowers or cacao shells before a festival, so their prayers went up in a signature scent. Imagine branding your petitions like artisanal candles. This one is storm-friendly sunrise. That one, safe journey and please no sprained ankles. You can almost hear a vendor whisper, "Try the marigold blend pairs nicely with butterfly wings from yesterday." Practical minds in the present love to point out that smoke has earthly benefits. It discourages insects, masks less pleasant odors, and helps set a shared rhythm for large gatherings. Researchers still go back and forth over what mattered most here, the theology of fragrant speech or the logistics of crowd control and sanitation. Standing in the haze, you suspect a neat answer would disappoint the gods. Why not both, when both are useful and beautiful? A novice brushes past with a basket of resin pellets shaped like tiny cones and discs. That detail catches your eye. The copal isn't just broken chunks, it's molded, sorted, sometimes even stamped with small glyphs. The novice pinches one between finger and thumb and drops it onto a bed of coals. The pellet resists, then surrenders with a soft sigh. More smoke, more murmured prayers. You start timing your breaths to the rise of each plume, and the body's cynical edges begin to soften. Nearby, two older women have set up a low table with stalks of fresh herbs. They flick bundles of aromatic leaves, basil, epazote, mint through the smoke, then sweep them over a supplicant's shoulders and spine. The gesture is brisk, almost domestic, like dusting a shelf, and then the herbs are tossed onto the coals as if the person's heaviness could be burned off and sent upward. The women trade quiet jokes while they work. It turns out even sacred dry cleaning deserves a laugh. A curious practice appears in a few painted manuscripts. Before grand rites, temple keepers carried ember pots through the city at dawn, collecting first breaths of household fires to merge with the main brazier. The idea tickles you, a civic blend of scent notes, from humble griddle to royal torch, woven into one communal exhale. If last night's pulque was shared cup, today's copal is shared atmosphere. The priest with the shell mantle pauses at the base of a doorway and draws a slow spiral with his censer from ground to lintel, a perfume ladder only spirits can climb. He turns and does the same gesture in front of you, and for a moment your face vanishes from your own awareness, replaced by warmth, weight, and a tingle behind the eyes. You cough, politely, in the way of someone who has just inhaled both holiness and a small campfire. He grins, saints and sinuses equally open. Joke, one accomplished. A breeze crosses the plaza, and the clouds shear into ribbons, revealing sunlight in bright slices. The drums are distant, no longer insistent heartbeats but low reminders that the city keeps time even when the air is thick. You remember the marigold petals from the butterfly dance and realize the scent has found them too. Flower and resin, wing and smoke, yesterday and today braided into one long moment. Someone brings out an effigy, a small maize dough figure with inlaid seeds for eyes. It's placed near the brazier, and the priest fans smoke across its face as if waking it gently. This little idol won't last. It will be broken and shared later at a household altar. For now it breathes what you breathe. You think of the communion feast and how scent is a kind of taste for the sky. On the steps, a few young acolytes sit with sealed jars. They lean close, whispering words inside, then stopper them quickly. You've heard that those jars will be buried under new floors or opened on festival mornings, releasing stored vows like bubbles from a lake bed. The image pleases you more than it should promises, decanted like a vintage air. If you could bottle a sigh, this is how you'd do it. Not everything lands with solemnity. A boy fumbles his censer and sends up a wild burp of smoke that engulfs a stern official. When the cloud clears, the man's eyebrows have gone from formidable to slightly ashy. He blinks, the crowd titters, and even he yields a reluctant smile. The plaza exhales together. Sacred, yes, also funny. The gods probably appreciate a good eyebrow roast. Joke 2, gently delivered. As midday leans toward afternoon, the scent settles into the stone, the garments, the hair of everyone who passed through. That is part of the strategy. To let the ritual cling and travel so that long after the fire dies down, people carry a portable temple with them. You brush your sleeve and raise it to your face. The smoke has written a short poem there. It reads like home, even if this isn't yours. Before you leave, a woman steps into your path and lifts her censer. She draws a circle of smoke around you, then another, then a final quick cross, the way you might seal a letter with wax. For clear paths, she says. You nod your thanks and realize the joke writes itself. The clearest path begins in a cloud. Joke 3, born on a curl of white. The last look back gives you a plaza of pale veils, people drifting in and out of visibility, voices softened to murmurs. You've learned that Aztec ritual has 1,000 textures, blade sharp, petal soft, skin raw, drum loud. Today it is vapor, giving shape to breath and thought. You step away smelling like a prayer that decided to come with you. The afternoon haze still clings to the streets as you cross into a quieter quarter of the city, where the traffic of market cries and drumbeats gives way to a slow, deliberate hush. Here, the houses lean closer together, their plaster walls painted in faded reds and blacks. At the far end of the lane, a small temple opens into a courtyard, and at its center sits an object so polished it seems to drink the light, a great disk of obsidian, dark as midnight, mounted on a wooden frame. This is the Tezcatl, the obsidian mirror, and today it will be used for divination. In Aztec thought, mirrors like this are not simply reflective surfaces. They are doorways, windows to realms unseen, tools for speaking to gods or glimpsing the patterns of fate. The god Tezcatlipoca, smoking mirror, takes his very name from it, a reminder that the truth is rarely revealed without distortion. A priest approaches the disk with measured steps, his cloak patterned in black and gold to echo the colors of the stone. He carries a small bowl of water, which he pours over the mirror's surface before wiping it clean with a cloth dusted in ground charcoal. The obsidian gleams again, not like glass but like still water under a moonless sky. In recorded accounts from early chroniclers, these mirrors were used in various ways: to see distant events, to identify treachery, to choose auspicious days for war or marriage. Some even describe rulers gazing into smaller handheld mirrors before delivering judgment, as if consulting an invisible witness. A curious note preserved in Nahua oral tradition says that sometimes a mirror was set at the center of a ritual dance, and participants moved around it in spirals while a diviner stared into its depths. The belief was that the movement of bodies could stir visions in the stone, much like ripples changing the surface of a pond. Today's ritual is intimate. The priest seats himself before the mirror, flanked by 2 assistants who keep a slow rhythm on turtle-shell drums. From a pouch at his waist, he scatters a pinch of copal resin onto a small brazier. The smoke drifts toward the mirror, curling around its edges, as if coaxing it to speak. One by one, petitioners come forward. A young woman kneels, placing a small clay figurine at the base of the frame. The priest leans forward, his gaze fixed on the mirror's depths. His lips move soundlessly for a moment, then he nods, giving her a string of maize kernels tied with red thread. She accepts it with both hands, bowing low before leaving. A warrior approaches next, his shield slung over his back. The priest studies the mirror longer this time, his brows furrowing slightly. Finally, he draws a circle in the air with his finger and touches the warrior's chest. No words are exchanged, but the man's expression changes not to joy or sorrow, but to the calm of someone who has been given direction. Debates among modern scholars focus on whether visions in the mirror were guided by trance, by suggestion, or by the play of light and shadow on the stone. To the people here, the question is irrelevant. What matters is that the mirror sees, and that the one who looks into it understands how to listen. When the final petitioner has gone, the priest covers the mirror with a woven cloth, tying it in place with a cord. The brazier is extinguished. The drums stop. The obsidian now rests in silence, its surface hidden until the next time it is called upon to speak. As you leave the courtyard, you catch your own reflection in a smaller mirror leaning against a wall. For an instant, the sunlight flares across its surface and your face vanishes, replaced by nothing but black. You blink, and your image returns. It's impossible to say whether the moment was only a trick of light or if, for a heartbeat, the mirror was looking back. The next day dawns sharp and clear, the air carrying a cool bite that makes every sound travel farther. Word drifts through the streets that a pilgrimage is underway not to another city, but to the mountains that guard the valley. You join the stream of people heading toward the causeways, where canoes wait to ferry travelers to the base of a distant peak. This is a rain-calling journey, an offering to coax the storm gods into blessing the fields. The trip begins with low conversation and the creak of paddles. The lake water glints like hammered obsidian, broken only by the wakes of passing boats. Once ashore, the chatter fades. The climb is not casual. Every step is part of the rite. Pilgrims carry baskets of maize, clay vessels of water, and bundles of fresh flowers. Priests walk at the front, their faces painted blue and white like shifting clouds. The path winds upward through slopes dotted with agave and small pines. The air grows thinner, cooler. Every so often, the group stops at a natural spring or boulder, where offerings of copal are burned, the smoke spiraling into the wind. Each pause feels deliberate, as if the climb is a conversation with the mountain itself, one greeting at a time. Ethno-historical accounts mention that certain mountain peaks were considered literal abodes of the rain gods. Some had shrines or carved stones at the summit, where priests would deposit offerings ranging from flowers to animal figurines. On rare occasions, live sacrifices were made, especially during drought years when desperation outweighed mercy. One lesser-known detail recorded in Nahua oral traditions tells of pilgrims carrying small ceramic frogs painted bright green and yellow, placing them near springs to sing to Tlaloc and his helpers. The frogs were symbolic messengers, reminding the gods of the sound of rain. As you climb, you hear the dull clink of a drum carried by one of the attendants. It's not played yet. The beat will only start when the group nears the top. Instead, the climb itself sets the rhythm. Crunch of gravel, swish of cloaks, slow breathing in unison. The final stretch is steep, forcing you to place your hands on the earth for balance. The peak opens into a flat space ringed with low stones. At the center stands a weathered altar, its surface stained with soot from centuries of fires. The priests arrange the offerings in careful symmetry. Flowers on the east side, maize on the west, water vessels at the north and south. The arrangement mirrors the cardinal points, an invitation for rain to fall across the whole land. At last, the drum begins a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The priests lift their arms, chanting to the sky, their voices bouncing back from the surrounding slopes. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of pine and wet stone. A thin veil of cloud slips across the sun, dimming the light. Some kneel, others stand with faces tilted upward, eyes closed as if feeling for the first drop. You can't tell whether the clouds were always coming or if the words have truly drawn them. It hardly matters. In this moment, the mountain, the people, and the sky feel like three parts of the same body breathing together. When the last chant fades, the offerings are left in place. The descent is quieter than the climb, the air cooler, the path damp in spots as if a mist has already passed over. At the base, the pilgrims scatter back toward their canoes, and life in the city will resume as normal. But for now, the peak stands crowned in cloud, holding the echo of voices that asked for rain and perhaps, just perhaps, were heard. Morning returns with a warmth that feels less like heat and more like a quiet invitation. You follow it into a temple courtyard that seems almost modest compared to the grand stairways and skull racks. No roaring drums here. Only a rectangle of dark soil framed by stone, a few water jars beaded with condensation, baskets of seed corn, and a hush that belongs in a garden. The city's noise hangs back at the gate as if it knows this space is a mouth that must not be filled with chatter. Men and women file in carrying small bundles wrapped in cotton. A priestess in a green mantle directs them with a gentle gesture toward the soil bed. Today belongs to maize, the food that stitches every Aztec day together. You have eaten it in gruel, in flat cakes, in festival breads sweetened with honey water. Now you watch the people return it to the earth as if tucking a child in for a nap. Two attendants kneel and smooth the soil with obsidian blades, their motions slow enough to count the seconds between breaths. The scent rises at once. Loam, crushed herbs, a memory of last night's copal still woven into the fibers of everyone's clothes. This patch is not a farm. It is a symbol that stands for 1,000 chinampas out on the lake, for terraces on distant slopes, for hands that will pull weeds in afternoon glare. The courtyard keeps all of that inside a square you can cross in 20 steps. The priestess lifts a basket and shows what the bundles hold. Kernels the color of sunsets and storm clouds, creams and blues and burnished reds. Each one looks carved rather than grown. Through the doorway, sunlight strikes the basket, and the seeds glow like small teeth of light. A low chant begins. It does not ask for thunder, it asks for patience, a more difficult thing. If you want a hard kernel of context to hold on to, consider this. Rituals that honor maize stood at the center of seasonal life here. Offerings to Chichimecoatl, the maize mother, and to Sentiotl, the maize lord, marked the passages of sowing and harvest. In the temple precincts of the capital, excavators have found caches that held maize, copal, shells from far coasts, and flecks of jade. The city seems to have buried a map of its diet and its desires beneath its feet. The planting begins with water. An acolyte tips a jar and lets a thin stream fall across the soil in a steady ribbon. The priestess works the surface with her fingers, then presses the first kernel into place. Everyone waits a heartbeat before the next follows. The tempo is deliberate, like placing beads onto a cord. Children lean forward to see the exact spot where seed disappears. A few copy the priestess and tap the soil twice as if to say, "Sleep well." A curious detail you might not expect slips out of a story an old woman tells her granddaughter while they plant. She says that in her village, the first cob harvested is dressed in a tiny woven cloak and kept on the household altar through the winter. Some even paint a face on the cob. It is not a toy. It is a guest of honor who will be invited to watch every meal. If your kitchen shelf had eyes, it might look like this. Try not to give it performance anxiety. The chant grows, then thins to a hum, then settles into breaths. People step forward one by one with their bundles. Each person presses 3 kernels into the soil, then wipes their fingertips on a sprig of basil and drops the sprig beside the seeds. The herb will crumble into the dirt. The perfume is for the waiting. You remember the incense clouds from yesterday and realize you are watching a quieter version of the same idea. The sky is not the only thing that listens to fragrance. The ground listens too. Debate among specialists does circle this ritual garden. Some argue it is largely symbolic, a city's polite echo of work done in the fields, the real power living out on the chinampas where spades bite and feet drown in mud. Others insist that temple plantings carry their own weight, that the soil here, mixed with ash and offerings, becomes an axis where divine attention meets daily hunger. As always, opinion arrives like rain in different places at different times. On the stone ledge, you notice maize dough figures resting on woven mats, round bellies, seed eyes, tiny pressed mouths. Earlier you saw a similar figure near the incense brazier. Here the dough is thicker, studded with kernels that glint when the light finds them. At a signal, the figures are lifted, passed briefly over the bed, then carried to a side table. Later they will be broken and shared. Eating part of the story is a way to remember it, also a way to keep it from going stale. Your jaw is a library with very practical shelving. The priestess now walks the perimeter with a gourd rattle filled with dried corn. The sound is soft, a rain made of seeds. She shakes it at the four corners, and then in the middle, where a small clay frog sits on a tile. You saw its cousins on the mountain yesterday. Here the frog keeps its mouth open as if to swallow the first thunderclap. 3 light jokes have to sneak in, or the gods will mark you down for solemnity fatigue. So you take your turn. First, when a boy drops a kernel and it rolls toward the gate, he chases it like a runaway jewel and returns panting. The priestess pats his head and says the earth appreciates enthusiasm. The boy grins like a sunrise and pockets an extra seed for luck. The courtyard does not file a complaint. Second, a merchant in embroidered sandals tries to kneel with dignity and loses the sandal to the mud edge of the plot. He emerges with 1 clean foot and 1 honest foot and laughs before anyone else can. Someone hands him a damp cloth. He cleans the fancy sandal, then rubs a little dirt on the clean one to even the story. Fashion is balance. Third, a novice shakes the rattle too close to his ear, flinches, and then nods as if pretending the startle was a deep mystical insight. To be fair, sometimes revelation does sound like a bag of popcorn. A woman steps forward with a small bowl of salt mixed with yellow petals. She pinches a bit and rains it lightly over the bed. You watch salt used on meat in the cannibal banquet not long ago. Here the gesture belongs to preservation of another kind. The priestess follows with water again, tracing lines no wider than a finger across the soil, as if writing a letter the earth already knows how to read. Someone begins a quiet recitation of planting rules. Do not curse while you sow. Do not hurry. Do not sing about death near the field. If you must sing, choose something steady. The advice feels like a manual for living disguised as farming notes. You could apply it to obsidian mirrors, to midnight vigils, to getting through a crowded canal without elbowing anyone. Slow is a kind of offering. Near the gate, a small table holds 4 tiny torches. An acolyte lights them from a coal carried in a covered pot. The flames are brief, just long enough to touch to the corners of the plot and then die. Fire greeted the seeds. Water followed. Earth receives. Breath drifts over all of it in the form of whispered prayers and the priestess's low song. The 4 elements have learned choreography and refuse to miss their cues. People step back. Silence sits down beside the bed. A final gesture remains. The priestess opens her palm to reveal a green braid of young maize leaves tied with a red thread. She tucks it into the soil at the center and presses the earth gently with both hands. Then she rises, looks around the circle, and smiles with a tired kindness that belongs to planters and midwives. The hard part will come in the heat, and the insects and the sudden storm that flattens the careful rows. For now, the city has buried hope properly and patted it smooth. On your way out, you pass the baskets of kernels. One has a few left. You cannot take them. That would tilt the balance. But you do let your fingertips hover above the colors, the reds and blues and creams that look like a calendar you could eat. The courtyard releases you to the street, where the noise returns, where traders argue gently, where a hawk wheel cuts the air. In a week, the bed will show tiny spears. In a month, soft tassels. In a season, the courtyard will be a small forest whispering in a language you now partly understand. You think of the skull rack and the snake circle, and the obsidian night of the mirror. You think of marigolds and the pulque's cloud and the incense that wrote poems on your sleeve. This city does not separate feeding the gods from feeding the people. It plants both in the same square of earth and tells them to grow together. The day warms quickly, and the smell of roasting maize from yesterday's planting ritual still seems to cling to the air as you weave through narrow lanes toward a small cluster of workshops. The thump of wood mallets and the scratch of bone awls echo inside, and when you step in, you find a half circle of artisans bent over bare skin, not for flaying, but for painting and puncturing. Today is dedicated to tattooing for the gods. In the Aztec world, skin is not merely a boundary, it's a canvas for vows, a place to carry divine symbols as close as your own heartbeat. The men and women here have come to receive permanent marks that speak to the deities they serve or the feats they've achieved. Warriors display eagle talons or jaguar spots to declare their rank, while merchants might choose maize plants or rain glyphs for luck on their trade routes. The process begins with pigment preparation. A boy grinds charcoal and hematite to powder on a flat stone, then mixes it with water and a sticky sap until it becomes a paste as black and deep as obsidian at night. Another pot holds a brilliant blue made from crushed indigo and ground turquoise, reserved for marks that honor Tlaloc and other rain spirits. A tattooer dips a thorn into the ink and presses it into the skin with a quick, practiced motion. The recipient exhales sharply but does not flinch. The pattern emerges dot by dot, each puncture a small offering of pain. These marks are not chosen lightly. They bind the wearer to a god, a promise, or a story. To cover them later would be like forgetting the terms of an oath. One unusual note recorded in early Nahua accounts describes initiates fasting for several days before receiving their tattoos, so the body's heat would drink the pigment more deeply. Some also carried offerings, a small pinch of maize, a feather, or a shell to give to the tattooer as part of the exchange. Here, the craft is sacred labor, and the artist is both maker and witness. Scholars still discuss whether such tattoos served mainly as religious declarations or as public records of achievement, like a biography written on the skin. Standing in the workshop, you can see it's both. A jagged serpent on a man's forearm tells you he has danced in the snake ceremony. A spiral sun on a woman's shoulder means she has offered blood in the new fire ritual. The room smells of resin, pigment, and faintly of blood. The sounds are steady tap, inhale, exhale, murmur. Occasionally someone laughs softly, breaking the intensity of the moment. One man jokes that the gods had better appreciate how much more handsome they've made him today. His friend replies that beauty is a poor shield against divine impatience. A young apprentice sits in the corner, practicing on a strip of cured hide, his hands careful but slow. The older tattooer leans over and guides his motion. It's not just about pressing a thorn into skin, it's about making the thorn sing without breaking the song. When each piece is finished, the tattooer rubs a salve of crushed herbs into the skin to soothe it. The recipient stands, turning the fresh mark toward the light. There's no mirror here. The point is not to admire, but to feel. You see them flex their arms, shift their shoulders, testing the way the design moves with their body. The mark is now part of them, a new layer that will walk and breathe until their last day. As you step back into the street, the sun catches on your arm where a bit of pigment dust has settled. You brush it away, but a faint shadow of blue clings to your skin. It fades quickly, yet the thought lingers. Every mark here is a contract signed in flesh, one that will not wash off with rain or time. The air is warmer than yesterday, heavy with the kind of heat that makes shadows cling close to walls. You follow a path toward the far edge of the temple precinct, where the sound of animal calls cuts through the hum of the city, the low growl of a cat, the shrill cry of a bird, the dry whisper of something sliding across stone. You soon reach a courtyard lined with reed cages and tethered perches, and the scent here is unmistakable, a mix of musk, feathers, and fresh earth. Today's ceremony calls not for human offerings, but for creatures whose forms carry the god's own signatures. The Aztecs believed animals could embody divine aspects, the jaguar for Tezcatlipoca's stealth and power, the eagle for Huitzilopochtli's vision and might, the serpent for renewal and the underworld's mysteries. Offering them was not an act of dismissal, but of sending their spirits directly to the divine realms they mirrored. Priests in feathered cloaks and jaguar skin capes move among the cages, checking each animal. A massive eagle flares its wings as one priest approaches, its eyes as sharp as obsidian points. A sleek jaguar paces in the shade, muscles rippling under its spotted coat. In a corner, Coiled serpents rest in woven baskets, their bodies looped in silent patience. One intriguing note from early pictorial codices shows that before such sacrifices, the animals were sometimes ritually fed symbolic foods, maize dough shaped like hearts or drops of colored water meant to represent blood. The idea was to give them a taste of divine energy before sending them on their journey. The ceremony begins with the jaguar. Its handler guides it gently into the center of the courtyard, where an altar is strewn with marigold petals and bowls of copal. Drums thump slowly, the sound deep enough to vibrate through your chest. The jaguar crouches low, ears forward, gaze fixed on the high priest. The air feels taut, as though the animal understands the gravity of this moment. Some modern researchers still question whether these sacrifices were purely religious, or whether they also had political weight, demonstrating the empire's command over creatures as fierce and free as the jaguar and eagle. Standing here, you feel both interpretations pressed together like the two sides of a coin. Next comes the eagle. It is lifted from its perch by a handler wearing thick leather guards, its wings spread wide, catching the sunlight in a blaze of gold and bronze. The bird does not cry out, only blinks slowly as it's carried to the altar. The priests bow to it before the rite proceeds, a mark of respect that feels older than the city itself. The serpents are last. Carried in their baskets, they are placed in a careful spiral around the altar's base, their bodies sliding and twisting over the stones. The drums shift into a higher, quicker rhythm, like a pulse that rises before the final act. Incense smoke thickens until the animals are half veiled in shifting white. When it is done, the courtyard falls silent. The bodies are removed with care, taken to be buried or burned depending on the god they were meant for. The air smells strongly of copal and warm fur, of feathers and sun-baked stone. No one lingers. The energy here is too sharp, too heavy to carry casually back into the streets. As you step away, a single eagle feather drifts past your shoulder and lands on the ground ahead. You pick it up without thinking, its shaft still warm from the bird's body. In your hand, it feels less like a trophy and more like a reminder that in the Aztec world, the line between human and animal, mortal and divine, is not a wall but a thin membrane you can cross in a single breath. The evening light slants across the plaza, painting the walls in deep orange when the sound of rattles and laughter begins to roll in from the southern streets. You follow it into a wide-open square strung with banners of flayed paper cutouts. The shapes sway in the warm air, jaguars, serpents, suns their edges trembling as if alive. At the far end, a tall wooden scaffold has been draped in bright fabrics and crowned with a mask too large for any human face. It grins in wide, painted teeth framed by feather fans. This is the feast of the flayed gods, a festival dedicated to Sheep Totek, the lord of the flayed skin, but without the solemn weight of the skin-wearing priests you saw before. Here, the atmosphere feels almost like a carnival. Vendors carry trays of maize cakes dusted with chili powder. Musicians weave through the crowd, and children dart between dancers wearing elaborate masks carved from wood or shaped from stiffened cloth. The masks are the centerpiece. Some mimic the god's own face, painted gold with red streaks down the cheeks, the eyes ringed in black. Others are monstrous, blending animal and human features, crocodile jaws with eagle eyes, or deer antlers sprouting from a human brow. The idea is transformation, stepping briefly into another skin, whether divine, animal, or fantastical. One striking detail from early colonial descriptions mentions mock battles staged during this festival, where masked participants wielded wooden swords padded with cloth. The bouts were theatrical, ending with exaggerated deaths and grand recoveries, a living play of death and rebirth. Here, you watch a group of youths acting out such a scene, tumbling onto the ground in overblown agony before springing up to bow. The crowd roars with approval. Scholars often debate whether this lighter festival was a public echo of the more solemn rites, a way to let the common people participate in the god's cycle without the intensity of real sacrifice. If so, it works beautifully. The space feels alive, joyful, yet still threaded with the god's core symbolism, shedding what is old to emerge renewed. In one corner, a group of older women sits at a low table, carving thin sheets of maize dough into shapes that resemble human skins, complete with painted features. These are passed to festival goers to wear briefly over the face, the way one might don a paper mask. The sensation is strange, warm, pliable, almost like touching skin, and then, as you remove it, the dough is dropped into a pot of boiling broth to be eaten. Renewal, swallowed and shared. Nearby, a dancer's costume catches your eye, a full suit of overlapping feathered panels dyed in sunset colors, moving like flame as the wearer spins. His mask is half human, half jaguar, and the way he leaps across the square, it's as if he's hunting the music itself. The drummers keep the beat quick and light, the kind of rhythm that makes stillness impossible. The sun drops lower, and the scaffold at the square's end becomes the stage for the night's final act. A performer dressed as Sheep Totek steps forward, his mask glittering with gold leaf. In his hands he holds a sheaf of maize stalks bound with red cord. He lifts it high, turning slowly so everyone sees, then lowers it to the scaffold's base where children wait to take pieces. Each child receives a stalk and runs off into the crowd, some holding them like torches, others waving them as prizes. Laughter rises again, and you realize that here, joy is the god's skin worn just for the night, then shed without regret. When you leave, the paper banners ripple in the breeze behind you, their cut-out shapes bending shadows on the stone. For a moment, you catch the glint of torchlight on a mask's eye-hole, and it feels like the god himself just winked. The night after the feast still hums faintly in your bones when you wake to the sound of drums again, this time slow and steady, like footsteps from far away. You follow them toward the central plaza, where the mood is neither festive nor grim, but somewhere in between, an edge of celebration wrapped around inevitability. The wide stairway of the main temple has been cleared, and below it, in the open space, a line of captives stands waiting. These are men taken in recent wars, some in the flower battles you witnessed earlier. They wear clean cotton garments and simple feather ornaments. Their hands are bound, but their backs are straight. It is not a silent line. Some speak softly to each other, a few even smile, but there's a kind of restraint here, as though every movement belongs to a script they have rehearsed in their minds. Today is their last day, and it will end not in chains, but in a dance. The crowd forms a wide circle. Drummers sit just inside it, their hands moving in a measured rhythm that seems to pull the captives forward. At a signal from the priests, the men step into the open space. A flute begins to weave a high, clear line over the drumbeat. The captives begin to move. This is not a clumsy march, nor a desperate plea for mercy. The steps are deliberate short strides, turns that mirror each other, arms rising and falling in time with the music. The dance is called netotilistli, and its purpose is twofold: to honor the captives as warriors, and to offer their bodies to the gods with dignity. Ethno-historical records mention that the garments worn for this dance often bore the colors or symbols of the captives' home cities, acknowledging their identity even at the moment they would be given to a foreign god. In some cases, family members were allowed to watch, standing at the edge of the crowd, adding their own voices to the music. A lesser-known account in certain pictorial codices suggests that each step of the choreography corresponded to part of a myth, the captives tracing the path of a hero who willingly entered the underworld. To anyone who knew the story, the movements were a map. The music quickens slightly, and the men adjust in perfect unison, their feet stamping harder into the earth. Dust begins to rise, catching the torchlight. One man throws his head back mid-step, letting out a short laugh that somehow doesn't break the rhythm. The crowd reacts with a low murmur, but no one stops the dance. Modern scholars sometimes question whether this final performance was purely symbolic, or whether it also served to calm the public, to frame death as a seamless part of the cycle, not a rupture. Watching the faces in the crowd, you suspect it's both. There is pride here, and sorrow, and a shared understanding that the gods demand life, but life can choose the manner of its giving. As the dance draws to a close, the captives form a circle around the drummers. They stamp one last time in unison, then bow slightly toward the temple. The drums stop. For a heartbeat, the plaza is utterly silent. The priests step forward, and the captives are led toward the stairway. Some glance at the crowd one last time. Others keep their eyes on the steps ahead. The dance is over, but the offering it announced is just beginning. As you turn away, the rhythm of their footsteps echoes the rhythm of the drums still in your ears. The plaza seems to hold its breath, knowing that by morning, the gods will have been fed, and that somewhere, in another city, another line of dancers will begin to form. Dawn lifts like a cool cloth from the city, and the streets already know where you are going. People step out of doorways with woven capes and empty gourds, heads wrapped against glare, feet bare for quiet. You fall in with them at the northern causeway, where the lake sits cold and mirror-flat, and the marsh birds speak in small metal clicks. This is the day for the sacred springs. You are not climbing to call rain this time. You are walking to fetch it, to carry home a piece of the mountain's pulse. The procession is long but unrushed. Boys balance narrow-necked jars on shoulder poles. Women cradle smooth calabashes against their ribs. Elders keep a tempo with short staffs on stone. Priests set the order at the front. Their mantles are green that remembers yesterday's maize bed. A singer begins a quiet line and the rest of you answer, not to be heard far away but to keep your steps in a promise. No jokes yet. Your breath needs to find its rhythm first. You leave the last chinampa field and enter a corridor of maggie and scrub oak. The path rises in folds, one low ridge after another, until the lake is a coin behind you. The air cools and tastes faintly metallic, the way stone does just before rain. At a resting stone, the leader unties a pouch and hands around pinches of parched maize, a bite for the body, a nod to the plant that will drink the water you bring back. You think of the courtyard plot and the seed colors like sunsets and storms. Yes, this is the same story, just written in a different alphabet. When the path bends into a creek bed, the singing stops by itself. You can hear the spring before you see it, a low, continuous whisper through rock teeth. The place is not grand. It is a bowl of wet stone under a fringe of fern, a clear mouth where water arrives as if by agreement. Someone has set a small platform of wood beside the pool and laid a frog figurine at the edge. That little guardian has been busy lately. It stares at the surface as if waiting for a reply. The priests begin with incense. Not much, just enough to perfume the first breath rising off the water. They scatter flower petals, mostly white, and the pool becomes a wide eye. A pair of attendants kneel to wash their hands and forearms. No one dips a gourd yet. First, the place must be greeted. Accounts from the valley describe set formulas for this greeting during the season of Atalkawalo, when waters and the beings who live with them receive the first honors of the year. The formulas are not shouted here. They are spoken close, syllables placed carefully like stones. You notice a peculiar instrument in an assistant's hands. It is a whistle jar with 2 chambers and a handle, the kind that sings when water moves inside it. He tilts it, and a bird-like call wakes the hollow between 2 rocks. Then he tilts again, and the sound becomes a breathy rush, like a tiny rain passing your ear. These double-chambered vessels show up in offerings and in music, a small theatre of weather built from clay. Not every rite uses them, but when they appear, the air itself seems to lean closer. Now the filling begins. The first gourd is for the temple cisterns. The second is for the marketplace fountain that everyone uses to rinse hands and fruit. After those, the rest of the party may collect theirs. The rules are unbending and practical. Do not drink from the spring with your mouth. Do not muddy it with your feet. Do not set an empty jar mouth down on bare ground. The water that travels home must arrive home awake. Your turn comes, and the priest's helper steadies your hand. The gourd tilts, and the spring climbs into it, as if it has been waiting for exactly this shape. The weight grows sudden and sweet. There is a belief that fresh spring water carries a temper, a personality, and that it must be coaxed, not commanded. You believe it now because the surface settles the moment you straighten your wrist. as if the water were nodding. Fine, I suppose I will go with you then. Researchers still go back and forth about the range and rhythm of these pilgrimages. Some argue that specific named springs tied to deities like Chalchiuhtlicue were the only acceptable sources for official ceremonies. Others see a network of local springs feeding neighborhood altars, the temple flows and household flows braided but distinct. When the city is large and thirsty, theology and logistics tend to share a cup. The return walk is quieter. The party keeps greater distance between people, letting each jar breathe. Lunch is a handful of amaranth cakes at a shaded outcrop. One of the bearers dozes sitting up, chin on chest. Another teaches a child to hold the jar with one arm across, not under, to keep it from knocking the ribs. Practical wisdom counts as ritual too. 3 small jokes insist on stretching their legs. First, a boy asks if the sacred water will improve his singing. His grandmother says yes. It will make him sing softer when he spills any. Laughter moves like a breeze through the leaves. Second, a porter opens his packet of cakes and finds someone has traded his plain one for a chilly one. He eats it without blinking and declares himself purified by fire. The spring does not protest. Third, a priest steps over a root, stumbles, recovers at once, and claims he wanted to bless that specific root. The root accepts the promotion. The causeway appears, and with it the lake, green and slick with afternoon light. People at the city edge see your party and begin to arrange a welcome path. Musicians with small drums come forward. No big festival entrance. This is a soft procession. You pass through streets that have set out little mats of herbs at doorways to sweep your ankles with scent. The smell of copal from the incense plaza lingers in the stone and meets the spring's cool breath. Airy and watery shake hands. At the marketplace fountain, the second gourd is poured. The splash is ordinary, yet people treat it like a guest walking into a room. Children dip their fingers, then pull back fast, wide-eyed and solemn, the way children always are when they discover a rule translated into feeling. A merchant whispers that tomorrow his peppers will look brighter. A baker taps the fountain rim twice. A superstitious rhythm, he swears, makes bread rise evenly. The gods do not issue a correction. At the temple cistern, the first gourd becomes a long, graceful thread of water. The priest lets it fall from shoulder height, so it strikes and speaks. He drops a jade bead the size of a fingertip into the cistern after it. In some deposits found under old floors, tiny jade pebbles lie with shells and water-worn stones, as if the city kept a miniature river mouth in its foundations. These tokens are less about wealth than about courtesy. You bring something back to the water for what it has brought to you. The rest of the party carries their jars home. A woman sprinkles 3 drops across her threshold and 1 across the hearth. A midwife carries hers wrapped in cloth to a courtyard where a birth is due soon. Spring water appears at coronations and healings and at the first grinding of maize for a new household, not like a magical potion, but like a note sung at the exact pitch the room needs. As the sun leans toward evening, you sit on a low step and watch neighbors share what they carried. A cup goes to a man who could not walk the distance. Another goes to a girl who will tend her family altar, while her mother sells cotton at the market. The water tastes of stone and leaf. Your tongue remembers lake mornings and mountain wind. You think back to the drowning rite on the raft and to the climb where cloud pulled its veil across the peak. The city negotiates with water in many moods. Sometimes it begs, sometimes it bargains, sometimes it simply brings a spoon and says please. Today was the spoon. The last light threads the alley, and all the jars have found their shelves. Somewhere a whistle jar sings once, a single liquid note drifting over rooftops as if the spring were checking in. Your shoulder aches pleasantly where the gourds sat. You smell like resin and wet rock, which is to say you smell like the world after it has forgiven itself. The day feels stretched thin, as if the city has exhaled and is waiting for something to draw the breath back in. You sense it before you see it. The plaza is already filling, but not with the hurried chatter of markets or the rhythm of festivals. Instead, a low hum of anticipation threads the air, a sound too soft to be called noise, yet too steady to be silence. This is the closing ritual of the fifth sun, a ceremony meant to keep the great wheel turning for another age. The temple's broad steps are washed and swept until they almost shine in the waning light. Torches line the edges, unlit for now. At the summit, the high priest stands in a mantle the color of deep amber, flanked by 4 attendants in garments dyed to match the 4 cardinal directions: red, white, black, and blue. Each holds a bundle wrapped in reed mats, contents hidden from view. The fifth sun is the age in which the Aztecs believe they live, an era born from sacrifice and sustained by it. Myths tell that the previous sun's worlds before this one ended in fire, wind, flood, or jaguars, each destroyed when the gods withdrew their support. This ritual is an appeal, a binding knot of devotion and necessity, so the sun will rise again tomorrow, and for many tomorrows after. The first act belongs to the east. The attendant in red steps forward and unties his bundle, revealing an obsidian blade and a small bowl of maize kernels. He places them on the altar and scatters the maize in a thin arc, each grain catching the dying light like a spark. The second attendant, dressed in white for the north, pours water from a painted vessel onto the altar's edge, the droplets falling to the stone below. The third, in black for the west, adds a twist of copal, its resin scent coiling into the air as it meets a brazier's coal. The fourth, in blue for the south, sets down feathers from the quetzal and macaw, their colours flickering in the torchlight. Some sources from the early colonial period suggest that the closing ritual was a blend of public reassurance and divine insurance, part theatre, part treaty renewal with the cosmos. Whether every gesture has a counterpart in the oldest traditions is debated, but the structure remains consistent. Honor the 4 directions, speak to the center, and seal the agreement with a living gift. Tonight's offering is a single captive, a warrior taken months ago in ritual combat. His body is painted gold from head to toe, his hair bound high with a red cord. He ascends the steps without resistance, his eyes fixed on the high priest. At the top, he stands at the altar's center, the axis where all directions meet, and bows his head. The crowd below shifts, and a low chant begins, rising and falling like breath. Drums join in, slow at first, then gaining weight, each strike vibrating through the flagstones under your feet. The sun, now an ember at the horizon, seems to hang in place as if listening. The high priest raises his arms, obsidian blade flashing. The drums pause for a heartbeat, and in that pause you can hear the city inhale as one. The act is swift, practiced. The heart is lifted toward the sky, its rhythm fading into the air, and then placed into a vessel of jade at the altar's center. The drums resume at once, now faster, as if urging the sun to carry the gift into the next day. Torches are lit from the altar's flame and pass down the steps, their light spreading across the plaza. Families take the fire home to rekindle their hearths, just as they did in the new fire ceremony, a reminder that the sun in the sky and the fire in their homes are bound by the same covenant. Scholars still puzzle over whether this particular rite was tied to a specific date in the calendar or performed whenever omens demanded it. From here, it feels less like a scheduled appointment and more like a closing argument in a case that is always on trial. The crowd's chant softens, becoming a murmur, then silence. The high priest lowers his arms. The fifth sun has been petitioned, the offering made. Whether the gods accept will be known in the days and seasons to come, in the way the maize grows, in the steadiness of the rains, in the return of the dawn. As the people begin to disperse, the last light of the sun slips fully below the horizon. The torches sway in the breeze like small stars trying to hold the darkness back. You take one last look at the altar, the bundles, the empty space where the warrior stood, and you feel the weight of the exchange. One heartbeat for countless others. And now, my friend, the city grows quiet. The drums have gone to sleep, the incense trails have thinned to faint threads against the night, and the lake lies black and still under a crescent moon. The air carries a softness that has nothing to do with the day's heat, and everything to do with what has been given and received. You walk the causeway back toward the center, passing closed market stalls and shadowed doorways. The smell of maize bread cooling somewhere nearby drifts out to meet you, warm and familiar. In the distance, a torchlight flickers and disappears, leaving only the silver wash of moonlight on stone. The pace of your steps slows without you, meaning to the city's rhythm easing into your own. You think of all you've seen, the pounding drums of the Night of the Drums, the solemn climb for rain, the dance of captives, the garden of maize, the circle of snakes. Each one has been a thread, and together they have woven a cloth strong enough to wrap around the sun itself, keeping it close for another day. The breeze off the lake is cool now, slipping under your collar, carrying the faint salt and stone taste of the high springs. Somewhere, a lone flute plays a wandering line, the kind that could be a prayer or simply a melody for no one in particular. Either way, it follows you until you can no longer tell if the sound is outside you or within. When you finally reach your resting place, you pause before lying down, letting the quiet settle into your bones. The city will rise again with the dawn, and so will you. The fifth sun has been honored. For tonight, that is enough. Sleep now.